Chapter 487. The fire on the lake gradually died out, and the chill gradually rose. Tang Xiaotang walked behind Ning Ke and let go of Chen Pipi's hand. Suddenly, she knelt down with a thud, and 2 puffs of snow splashed from her knees. Then, she kowtowed heavily. Chen Pipi was slightly shocked. Tang Xiaotang said in a trembling voice, "Thank you, youngest uncle, for cleaning up the Enlightenment doctrine." Ning Ke did not move sideways to avoid it. He calmly accepted the big bow. He was very clear that the devil's doctrine, which had already withered in the world, respected and feared youngest uncle. However, the one they truly hated was Xiahou, the traitor. If he did not make Tang Xiaotang kneel, she would not be able to release the complex emotions in her heart. Moreover, Lotus consciousness fragment was in his sense of perception, so he was doing it on behalf of Lotus. But he looked at the quiet night sky of the lake and said, "There are many people by the lake. I'm afraid there will be some trouble if you kneel down." Tang Xiaotang stood up, and Chen Pipi wiped the snow off her forehead. Looking at the red and swollen forehead, he could not help feeling distressed. Hearing Ning Ke's words, he replied, "We are in Chang'an, so there will be no trouble." Today's battle with Xiahou had not been disturbed as he had expected. Of course, Ning Ke was very clear that it must be the academy that played a role in it. Hearing Chen Pipi's words, he could not help but laugh, and his heart was suddenly filled with pride. This was Chang'an, and they were disciples of the academy, so there would be no trouble. But what should he do next? The hatred and killing intent that had accumulated for 15 years were all released as Xiahou's body fell into the lake. Just like the mist that was spewing out from the boiling lake, an ordinary person would probably feel a little empty and perplexed after experiencing great joy and excitement. They would even be at a loss as to what to do. If Ning Ke was still the Ning Ke in the city of Wei, he would probably fall into such a state of mind. After killing Xiahou, it seemed that he had done all that he wanted to do in this life. There was nothing else to do, and he did not even know where to go. But now it was different. He had a home in Chang'an, and it was inconvenient to return to the old brush pen shop on Lin 47th Street. He also had a large house by the Yanming Lake. Although it was already ruined, it was still livable. Besides, there was the academy in the south of Chang'an, and he could always find a hut in the back mountain. "Let's go home first." Holding each other's arms, they walked to the house on the north bank of the lake where the fire had long been extinguished. However, although they were not seriously injured today, they were extremely exhausted and had already reached the point of exhaustion. At this time, when they relaxed their minds, their legs were as heavy as lead, and they almost fell when they took a step. Chen Pipi reacted quickly. He grabbed Ning Ke's arm and scolded him angrily. "Sang Sang has worked so hard tonight. Do you expect her to help you? Will it kill you to beg me?" Ning Ke said, "Don't be too nervous about me. No matter what, Xiahou is a visiting professor of Haotian Taoism. If this gets back to the West Hill or the Jishou Abbey, it won't be good for you. It's not like I want to be a fat Taoist." Chen Pipi said impatiently. Then he grabbed his arm and carried him on his back, walking towards the lake shore. Tang Xiaotang supported Sang Sang and followed behind. From time to time, the sound of snow squeaking could be heard on the quiet lake. The morning light gradually came. Tonight, many people surrounded the lake to watch. They looked at the 2 footprints on the lake, the people in front of the footprints, Ning Ke who was carried by Chen Pipi and the little handmaiden who was supported by Chen Pipi. They had complicated feelings and always felt that what they saw was not real. Ning Ke, who was at the upper see-through state, killed the overbearing General Xiahou, a powerhouse at the peak state of martial arts with the help of the little handmaiden. In many people's eyes, this was impossible. Even if Ning Ke was a disciple of the headmaster of academy, this was still impossible, because this was a fair and square battle. It was not common but not rare for a cultivator at a higher state to die in the hands of an opponent at a lower state. This was because battles had always been unpredictable. Assassination, poison, and traps could sometimes play a decisive role. It was not the first time that a cultivator at the see-through state was killed by an ordinary assassin. However, this rarely happened in a fair and square battle, because it was a competition of absolute strength. Especially for a grand cultivator who had entered the knowing destiny state, it was impossible for a cultivator at a lower state to defeat him in a fair and square battle. The knowing destiny state was a big threshold in cultivation. Once you crossed this threshold, you would be far away from the mortal world. In the records of the cultivation world, other than a powerful army that could use endless cavalry to coordinate with the terrain and exquisite tactics to kill a powerhouse at the knowing destiny state, no one had ever succeeded in challenging a powerhouse at the knowing destiny state. It was said that Kuharan had done it, but there was no audience for that battle. People only knew that the powerhouse at the knowing destiny state was dead, and Mr. Ku, who was at the see-through state, continued to ride on the little black donkey. This also meant that the battle between Ning Ke and Xiaoho at the Winter Lake was the first time in countless years that someone at the knowing destiny state could kill a powerhouse at the knowing destiny state. This would definitely be recorded in the West Hill scriptures. In this battle, Ning Ke had made a lot of preparations. It could even be said to be a trap. However, he was a talisman master, so no one had any doubts about his fighting style. The audience was only shocked by the means that the youngest disciple of the academy had displayed in the battle. Whether it was the storm of the talisman, the primordial 13 arrows, or the mysterious thunder in the lotus field, Ning Ke's skills had an effect that outsiders could not understand. They were so powerful. Although he was still in the see-through state, his skills had the power of the knowing destiny state. Finally, Sang Sang shone brightly at the edge of the cliff, which made everyone fall silent. Tonight, there were many spectators in Chang, and who were more powerful than Ning Ke, but they were still greatly shocked, especially Yi Hongyu, who was standing on the wooden bridge on the west bank. She was the most shocked. In today's world, among the three sects of Taoism, Buddhism, and the devil, as well as the academy, she had always been the strongest among the younger generation. No matter Prince Long Qing, Monk Guanhai, or even Tang Xiaotang, none of them could overshadow her. However, after seeing Ning Ke and Sang Sang's performance tonight, she suddenly had some other ideas. So she closed her eyes and thought silently. Her eyelashes trembled in the night wind, as if she had understood something through this battle. On the snow-covered city wall, Yi Su looked in the direction of the Yanming Lake in the distance. After a long silence, he said, "The academy is indeed powerful, and so is this guy." After watching the battle for a night, Yi Su's opinion of Ning Ke kept changing as he watched the thunder, the snow, and the iron arrows, iron lotuses, iron spears, and iron knives colliding with each other continuously. In the beginning, Ning Ke was just an ordinary person in his eyes. Then, he became not bad, and finally, he became very good. However, when Ning Ke finally succeeded in killing Xiaoho, he realized that his opinion was not accurate enough. He did not even want to hide his admiration and appreciation for Ning Quebec. Of course, Ning Ke was no match for him, the successor of the Jishou Abbey. However, he was so young, and yet he managed to kill Xiaoho in such an impossible situation. If he studied in the academy for a few more years and received a few more lessons from the headmaster of the academy, who could predict how high Ning Ke would climb in the future? Would there really be another Mr. Ku in the world? Xiaoho's death did not affect Yi Su's mood at all. Even if there was another Kuharan in the academy, it would just be another worthy opponent for him. Instead, it would make him feel gratified. Most importantly, he did not think that Ning Ke would become a second Mr. Ku. He turned to look at eldest brother and said, "Until now, are you still not sure?" Eldest brother asked. The West Hill Divine Palace said that it was a presumptuous judgment. Why do you insist on it? I have said that I believe that the divine priest of light may have made a wrong judgment, but he would never make a presumptuous judgment. Back then, the headmaster might have judged that the son of Lin Guangyuan could not be the son of Yama. That was why he thought that the divine priest of light had made a big mistake. That was why the divine hall apologized to the Tang Empire. However, if the divine priest of light was right, and the son of Yama was awakened in the general's mansion, then who could it be if not the son of Lin Guangyuan? Yi Su looked at him expressionlessly and said, "You know very well who it is." Eldest brother said, "Without evidence, there is no reason." Yi Su said, "Everyone is dead, but Ning Ke is still alive. This is the evidence." Eldest brother did not speak. Yi Su's words were simple and seemed unreasonable, but they could not be refuted. To be able to survive under any circumstances, even when death seemed inevitable, if he was not the son of God who was protected by Haotian, then he could only be the hero of the story. The black line had descended on the human world for 15 years, and the story had begun for 15 years. No one knew that the hero of the story was the son of Yama. Yi Su believed that Ning Ke was the son of Yama. The morning light appeared in the distance in the east, and it was quiet on the city wall. After an unknown period of time, the eldest brother said, "Teacher once said that if we can't be sure of the existence above the sky, then we should maintain spiritual reverence or vigilance. However, we should not pay any attention to it in our lives in the real world. This is the way to get along." Then he looked at Yi Su and said, "I am not sure if Ning Ke is the son of Yama. I believe that he is not, but I am very sure that he is the youngest brother of the academy." Yi Su quietly thought about the headmaster's words. After a while, he looked at the winter forest by the Yanming Lake and said indifferently, "Without evidence and without heaven's decree, even if Haotian Taoism has doubts, they will not do anything to Ning Quebec. I think the mute needs to hear these words, but I am very doubtful that he, who can no longer speak, can hear these words." The mute was not really mute, so naturally, he would not be really deaf. The so-called "can hear" referred to whether he wanted to hear and whether he was willing to believe the academy's words. Eldest brother looked at the winter forest and thought of the wayfarer of the Buddhism sect who was known for his perseverance. A faint look of worry appeared on his face. The wayfarer of the Buddhism sect had obviously come to Chang, and because of the rumor of the son of Yama. Since he dared to reveal his whereabouts, he naturally would not be afraid of the academy's pressure and harm Ning Quebec. He really did not have any good way to deal with the mute monk, because as he often repeated but no one believed, eldest brother was really not good at fighting. Yi Su looked at the quiet night forest and always felt that something was wrong. Because in the previous battle, the mute monk did not make a move, and he always felt that there was someone else in the forest. However, in this world, who could avoid the eyes of him and Mr. First of the Academy? At this moment, a sudden gust of wind blew in the winter forest by the lake. Along with the wind, there was a large wave of sad cicadas that made people want to cry, but the cicadas sounded so happy. Listening to the cicadas, Yi Su's face suddenly became extremely pale. It was not fear, but solemnity. It was the emotion of meeting the most powerful enemy in his life. There was only a very clear whistling sound. The wooden sword on his back also whistled and suddenly unsheathed. The sword was like a ray of light, flying away from the city wall, piercing the last trace of darkness before dawn, and stabbing towards the winter forest. Then, Yi Su jumped down from the city wall. In the morning wind, his robe fluttered slightly, and he followed the sword. His body movement was indescribably wonderful, like a thin piece of snow in the wind, and actually seemed to be no slower than the flying sword. I haven't figured out the next volume yet, so I was afraid in advance. That's why it was very difficult to write today. I want to report to everyone, and I will draft the next volume in my mind before going to bed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 488. The morning light was bright, and the winter forest was in chaos. A flying sword flew from the snow lake and danced among the withered trees at a high speed, accompanied by a whistling sound, looking for the place where the cicadas were chirping. A moment later, Yi Su swept into the forest. His robe fluttered and he waved his right hand. The flying sword whistled back from afar and fell into his hand. Then he put it back into the scabbard on his back. The cicadas had stopped chirping, and no one knew where that person had gone. In the cold winter forest, there was only the mute monk covered in snow and the dead body of the Qinghe Prefecture's Minister of Offerings on the ground. Yi Su looked at the rising sun in the east and saw the morning mist in the forest, which looked like thin and transparent cicada wings. He slowly raised his eyebrows and looked unprecedentedly serious. Eldest brother slowly walked in from outside the forest and stood beside him. He followed Yi Su's gaze and looked in that direction without any expression. With the sound of falling snow, the armor-like snow on the mute monk cracked and fell, revealing his plain cotton kasaya. Then he slowly stood up and bowed to eldest brother and Yi Su with folded palms. Eldest brother looked at the remaining snow between the monk's eyebrows and thought about the purpose of this world wayfarer of Buddhism. He could not help but frown and said, "Welcome, Master Qi Nian, to Chang and to preach Buddha." The world wayfarer of Xiankong Temple came to Chang, and this time to observe Ning Ke, the legendary son of Yama. He did not mean to be merciful, so eldest brother of the academy would not really welcome him. As for the last two words of "preach Buddha," it was clear. Qi Nian looked calm, and the remaining snow between his eyebrows seemed to be firm. He listened to eldest brother's words and did not respond. Last night at the winter lake, you kept silent in the winter forest and did not make a move. I always felt it was strange and thought that it was a teacher from the academy. I did not expect it to be that person. You have been practicing silent meditation for 15 years. Can't you stop that for a few steps? Yi Su looked at Qi Nian and asked. His expression was extremely serious and a bit cold. After the academy's youngest uncle, Tianzhu, the biggest enemy of Taoism in the world was the 23-year cicada cultivation. However, the Devil's Doctrine Master was extremely mysterious. Even with the great power and influence of the West Hill Divine Palace in the world, they had not found any trace of him for decades. No one would have thought that when the world gathered in Chang'an, there would be cicadas chirping by the Yanming Lake. The most mysterious person in the world had once again appeared in the world. When the West Hill Divine Palace heard of this news, they would definitely be shocked and use all their power to search for the cicadas. As the successor of the Jishou Abbey, Yi Su was even more vigilant. Qi Nian had been practicing the silent meditation for 15 years and was extremely powerful. Once he opened his mouth, the sound of Buddha would be heard in the world. However, he did not open his mouth last night in the face of the mournful chirping of the 23-year cicada cultivation and the silent but bone-chilling suppression of that person. Because he was not sure that he could win against that person if he opened his mouth. Therefore, he did not answer Yi Su's question at this time. Yi Su knew the mute monk's temperament well. Seeing that he didn't speak, he knew that he couldn't get any information about the 23-year cicada cultivation from him. He turned to look at the eldest brother and said, "This is Chang'an." His words were simple, but the meaning was clear. This was not the West Hill or the Xiankong Temple, but Chang'an of the Tang Empire, the territory of the academy. The master of the Devil's Doctrine came and left at will, which was a provocation to the academy. At this time, the academy should at least give an explanation. The eldest brother said, "All these years, that person has been attacking General Xiahou. He has given the academy enough face. This time, I didn't expect him to come out." Yi Su looked at the dead minister of offerings from Qinghe County and suddenly raised his finger to the thin piece of snow on his neck. He said, "He killed you in Chang'an. Does Mr. First not want to enforce the law of the Tang Empire on behalf of the academy?" The eldest brother sighed and said, "The academy does put the law of the Tang Empire first, but the law depends on the ability of the executor. The law of the Tang Empire can only restrict those who are able to be restricted by the Tangs. Neither the imperial court nor the academy can do anything to this person. We can't ask the headmaster for help." Yi Su was puzzled. In his opinion, even though the headmaster of the academy had not been involved in the affairs of the world for many years, the reappearance of the 23-year cicada cultivation in the world was a big event. Was this not enough to alarm the headmaster? No one spoke, or did not know what to say. The mysterious appearance and disappearance of the 23-year cicada cultivation made the three most powerful people in the academy, Taoism and Buddhism, subconsciously silent. The morning light gradually brightened, and the snow particles in the winter forest slowly danced in the light. They still looked like a large pair of cicada wings, but much fainter than before. Yi Su looked at the snow fog in the morning light and the pair of cicada wings. Suddenly, his expression changed slightly. Last night, he and the eldest brother had been watching Yanming Lake from the city wall, but they did not notice the movement in the winter forest. After all, the 23-year cicada cultivation in the winter forest was not facing an ordinary person, but Qin Yan, a powerhouse with no hindrance in Buddhism. How did that person do it? The devil's doctrine was not tolerated by the orthodox cultivation because the cultivators of the devil's doctrine tried in vain to replace the rules of Haotian, absorb the qi of heaven and earth in nature, and build a new world in the body. Had the Grand Master of the devil's doctrine surpassed this level? Could he cover the glory of Haotian with a light wave of the transparent cicada wings and have a world of his own in nature? This showed that the movement in the winter forest by the lake could not be noticed by him and Mr. First of the Academy, and the people in the cliff around the lake could not notice it at all. The 23-year cicada cultivation was so powerful. Thinking of this, Yi Su's face turned slightly pale. Then he felt very confused and felt that something was wrong. He silently sensed the aura left in the snow forest and fell into silence. While Yi Su was silent, the eldest brother and Qin Yan had a conversation. Qin Yan was mute, so the conversation was naturally one-sided. It was more like a gentle, calm, but unquestionable announcement. No one knew the specific content of the conversation, but it must have something to do with Ning, Quebec. Under the snow bridge, the soldiers of the Yulin Royal Guards were extremely tired. They did not feel too bad after a sleepless night, but they were blocked by one person for a whole night. They could only listen to the sound coming from the distant lake but could not participate in the battle, which made them feel ashamed and tired easily. Su Shi walked on the snow bridge and turned around in front of the second brother. He held the snow-covered railing and looked at the frozen river under the bridge. He said, "Am I really old?" The second brother slowly stood up and gently and carefully brushed off every remaining snow on his body to make sure that there was no wrinkle on his academy uniform. Then he said, "You are old." Su Shi was not angry, but indifferently said, "The academy is indeed a place that can create miracles. Ning Ke has done something that no one could think of. But do you really think it is fair?" The second brother walked to him and looked down the bridge. After a night of strong wind, the snow on the ice was piled up to the two sides, and the reflection of people and other things could be vaguely seen on the surface of the ice. He adjusted the position of the crown on his head to make sure that there was no deviation at all. He nodded in satisfaction and said in an unquestionable tone, "I do things faithfully." The wrinkles on Su Shi's face were very deep, which showed his old age in the morning wind. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Jun Mo, you have the style of an ancient gentleman. No one in the world dares to doubt you." But in the battle of the Winter Lake last night, Ning Ke completed a fatal blow to Xiaohe with his little handmaiden. 2 against 1. How is it fair? The second brother said, "My youngest brother is a talisman master. According to the rules of the cultivation world, he can certainly have a valet during a challenge. There is no problem with this." Su Shi thought of the great light between the cliffs of Yanming Lake last night and the thundering sound of weapons clashing on the lake. He frowned and said, "Ning Ke is not a simple talisman master. Miss Sang Sang is the only successor of the great divine priest of light. How can she be a valet?" Second brother said, "A talisman master is a talisman master. Even if youngest brother cultivates both martial arts and talismans, he is a talisman master if he says he is a talisman master. As for Sang Sang, even if she becomes the great divine priest of light of West Hill in the future, she can be a valet if she wants to be youngest brother's valet." Su Shi's face slightly darkened and said, "It turns out that Jun Mo also knows how to argue. I value reason and etiquette the most in the world. In this case, I am naturally good at using all kinds of means to make reason stand on my side. Not to mention arguing, I can even use force to fight." Second brother indifferently said, "Dao Shi monk of Yueluan Kingdom had a valet warrior monk. It was the challenge letter issued by your military ministry and the address information provided by your military ministry. If you didn't say it was unfair at that time, don't ever say it. Otherwise, the Academy doesn't mind asking the military ministry for advice on what is fair. After saying this, he turned around and walked to the other side of the snow bridge. The high crown on his head cast a very long shadow in the morning light, as if it was deeply engraved into the deep snow on the bridge. Su Shi looked at his gradually disappearing figure in silence. The person sitting cross-legged on the snow bridge left, so the snow bridge was open. For a day and a night, he didn't look at the scenery on the snow bridge. He just turned himself into a landscape painting, and no one dared to draw on it. An officer walked behind Su Shi and whispered something to him. Su Shi's voice was slightly hoarse as he said, "General Xiahou has made great contributions to the country, so he naturally needs to be restrained. As for his funeral, the palace will naturally arrange it. The military ministry just needs to be prepared." At this time in the imperial palace, the atmosphere was extremely depressing and tense. There were no eunuchs or palace maids around the snow hall, so only a few people could hear the empresses crying. These few people were also people other than the Academy who knew about the sibling relationship between the empress and Xiahou. In the princess's mansion not far from the imperial palace, it was a completely different situation. After the Taoist with the yellow oiled paper umbrella under his armpit left to report the news, an indescribable atmosphere of celebration mixed with some shock and confusion began to spread in the rain corridors and balconies. Li Yu stroked her slightly rising and falling chest and looked at the cup of tea in front of her. It took her great willpower to calm herself down. Ning Ke actually defeated Xiahou. This had brought great benefits. Even a calm person like her felt a little dizzy. But the fact that Ning Ke was still alive made her suddenly relaxed. Li Huiyuan sat beside her, looking a little confused. Of course, he knew that Xiahou was killed, and it was a good thing for him. But he couldn't understand why his sister and the counselors were so ecstatic. Could the Empress be sure of everything even if the military support was gone? He hadn't slept for a whole night, and now he just wanted to go to sleep. Li Yu waved her hand to let the counselors leave, but she didn't let him leave. The room was quiet. She looked at her favorite brother, and her clear eyes gradually became moist. She said in a slightly trembling voice, "After today, the future throne of the Tang Empire will be yours, my brother. I almost wrote myself to death. I want to vomit sitting in front of the computer. That's all for today. Tomorrow, the second volume will officially end. I hope I can get through these few days. There are always a few days at the end of each volume. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 489. Li Huiyuan was shocked by Li Yu's words. As a prince, he was not ignorant and incompetent. Of course, he knew how much benefit Xiahou's death would bring to him. But he still couldn't understand why his sister was so sure that he would be the next emperor. Li Yu looked at her brother, who was at a loss. She thought of how they had depended on each other since the death of their mother. She thought of the efforts and sacrifices she had made for her brother's throne. She could not help but have mixed feelings. She said, "Ning Ke is a student of the second floor of the academy. Xiahou was killed by him. How can that woman be close to the academy? No matter how hypocritical she is, the academy will not be on her side. How can her son be the emperor if there is an invisible gap between the academy and her?" Li Huiyuan finally came to his senses. Yes, without the support of the academy, father would not dare to hand over the empire to the empress, no matter how much he doted on that brat. Thinking of this, the young prince's breathing became heavier. He clenched his fists tightly, and his eyes were filled with excitement. There was even a ferocious look in his eyes. Li Huiyuan thought of another piece of news that Ming Qi had told him before. He said with a little distress, "The third minister of offerings of Qinghe County died in Chang'an. I don't know how they will react." Li Yu frowned. She also felt that this matter was a little troublesome. Over the years, the big families of Qinghe County had given her a lot of financial support. She could relatively easily win over the courtiers in the court, and Qinghe County had also helped her behind the scenes. Now that their ancestor had died in Chang'an, she didn't know whether it would have any impact. The house by the Yanming Lake had been severely damaged in the battle last night. The beams were broken and the walls were destroyed. It was a mess everywhere. Only the remote side yard was relatively intact. Ning Ke and Sang Sang returned to the side yard. Under the care of Chen Pipi and Tang Xiaotang, they took a bath and applied medicine. After eating some food, they began to rest and then fell into a deep sleep. The security in the lane by the lake had been lifted. There was no more control except that the runners of the Chang and local government were maintaining order outside the house and forbidding citizens from coming to see what was going on. Under the command of Mr. Qi, the fish dragon gang rushed to the Yanming Lake as fast as they could and began to clean up and repair the house. However, the house was so badly damaged that it was obviously not something that could be done in 2 or 3 days. The maids and stewards who had been dismissed by Ning Ke before the war also returned to the house. Looking at the mess, they could not help but feel a little scared. Some even wanted to leave. However, their 10-year contract was in the Grand Secretary's mansion. When the Grand Secretary Xing Jing and his wife went to see their daughter, they behaved. Since there were servants, Chen Pipi and Xiao Tang returned to the academy. Chen Pipi and Tang returned to the academy and Tang went back to the academy. Since the servants were taken care, Chen and Xiao Tang returned to Chang. Chen. You and I, Yi went. S Ming, S and Li, S Feng, and S and S S S S S S S S Ming, S S S S S S could T S S S S S S S S S. Chen S S S S, Chen's, T U S of, Ning Ke and Sang Sang were not seriously injured in the battle at the Winter Lake. It was not until Xia Ho used his iron spear that they started to bleed. However, this seemingly victorious battle still caused great damage to their spirits and bodies. After Ning Ke released the talisman storm in the house, triggered the explosion in the lotus field, and shot the 13 talisman arrows, the psyche power in his sense of perception and even the great spirit in his body were completely exhausted. Sang Sang's last burst of light on the cliff was almost a means of burning the essence of life. The light in the small building was gone, leaving only darkness. Her body was as cold as a block of ice. Ning Ke was very worried that the cold in her body would relapse. Before going to bed, he held her in his arms and warmed her body with his body temperature, just like in the past. However, his right arm was seriously injured because of the backfire of the talisman arrow. He was not used to using his left arm, so he only held her gently. The next morning, Sang Sang woke up. However, she had a terrible headache and could not get up. Ning Ke was also extremely weak. He dragged her back to bed and asked the maids to bring her food and water. He did not allow her to get up to do housework. After lying in bed for 3 days and 3 nights, Ning Ke's spirit gradually recovered. He climbed out of bed and entered the garden in the morning light. He found his padao and began to hack and slash. The sound of the padao whistled and the cold light shone like snow. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something and stopped. He stood in the middle of the winter courtyard, his body seemed to be a little stiff. He looked at the padao in his hand and remained silent for a long time. In the past few years, as long as there were no emergencies, he would get up early in the morning and wash and eat with Sang Sang's help. Then, he would start to practice. Whether it was his swordsmanship, archery, or meditation, he had never slacked off. This was because he was always facing the threat of death and the pressure of revenge. This morning seemed to be the same as the other ordinary mornings in the past. But in fact, this morning was very different from the past. He was now a student of the 2nd floor of the academy. There were not many people in the world who could threaten his life. Moreover, Xia Ho was already dead. Since Xia Ho was already dead, what was the point of practicing? Ning Ke held the heavy padao and stood in silence for a long time. Then, he continued to wave the blade. Every stroke was so concise and sharp, and every movement was so meticulous. He did not understand why he had to practice, so he did not think about it for the time being. Just as he had once said to eldest brother, these things were all the world and scenery that he had once lived in. For a while, he could not get rid of the powerful strength that he was used to, and he did not want to get rid of it. In the following winter days, the house by the Yanming Lake was gradually repaired by the craftsmen recruited by the Fish Dragon gang. Naturally, it cost a lot of money. In order to make up for this debt, Ning Ke had to use the bonus that Chao Xiaoshu had left for him in the casino in the western city in advance, and he even paid it in advance for the next year. Ning Ke and Sang Sang did not go anywhere. They had been staying in the house. Perhaps they were not used to the quiet and aimless life, or perhaps the injuries left by the battle at the Winter Lake had not really healed. Anyway, both of them were not in good spirits and seemed a little listless. This kind of listless feeling was not the feeling of a scholar beside a snow lake. It was just extreme fatigue after extreme relaxation. Of course, Ning Ke still maintained an extremely high level of vigilance. Although the battle at the Winter Lake was a fair duel, Xia Ho was, after all, the great general of the empire. He had countless colleagues and friends in the army and the imperial court. Now that he had died in Ning Ke's hands, who knew if there were any undercurrents surging in Chang'an? He had admitted in front of the palace that he was not the son of the Xianwei general, Lin Guangyuan. His Majesty's special pardon naturally did not count. Would the imperial court continue to investigate those murders? Nearly 10 officials or generals of the Tang Empire had died tragically in his hands. Would the empire that followed the law of the Tang Empire remain silent? What happened next was completely beyond Ning Ke's expectations. Xia Ho's funeral was solemn and silent. The Zhenjuan general's mansion was sealed, and everyone in the general's mansion, including the two young masters Xia Ho, embarked on their journey home. No one mentioned those murders, including the toughest military in the past. Now it had become unusually quiet. Other than the Grand Secretary Xing Jing and his wife who came twice, no one from the imperial court actually stepped into the house by the Yanming Lake. It was as if there had not been a confrontation in front of the palace a few days ago, and there had not been a fierce battle at the Winter Lake. It was as if nothing had happened in Chang'an. On a snowy morning, Yi Hongyu had also left the Yanming Lake. Ning Ke and Sang Sang held the big black umbrella and sent her to the gate of the courtyard. He looked at the newly renovated courtyard gate and recalled the scene on that rainy day. He sighed and said, "I really did not think that I would actually live with you for half a year." Yi Hongyu said, "You'd better not say such shallow and boring words in the future." "I will try to say something elegant and boring in the future." Ning Ke said, "You were forced to escape from the divine hall because you offended the great divine priest of judgment. After leaving Chang'an, where can you find a piece of pure land in the world? According to what you said that day, Yi Su would not care about the affairs of the divine hall, nor would he care about your life. Aren't you worried that you will be killed by the divine hall?" Yi Hongyu said, "Life and death is the most personal thing, and it is also something that people can't control themselves. We can't pin our hopes on others, even my brother. But I want to control myself. You are a Taoist. I will not engage in such a mysterious debate with you." Ning Ke replied with a smile. Then he reached out and brushed off a thin layer of snow that fell on his shoulder. With this action, the extremely shallow dimples on his face suddenly became clear. Yi Hongyu looked at the shallow dimples on his face and looked at his smile. She thought silently, what kind of life can make such a shameless and cold-blooded guy have such a beautiful smile? There is something that I have never understood. She suddenly said. Ning Ke was slightly startled and asked, "What is it?" Yi Hongyu said, "In terms of cultivation talent, I am clearly far better than you. However, my understanding of the paper sword is far inferior to yours. From the West Hill to Chang'an, I exhausted a lot of energy and finally understood most of it. However, you only looked at it for a night and could imitate the sword style and sword momentum so well. Ning Ke thought about it and said, I don't really understand either. Have you thought of an answer? Yi Hongyu said, that day on the snow lake, you condensed the day sword style on the saber and stabbed it into Xiaoho's body. At that time, I saw the scene and the sword momentum that was like a torrential turbid wave. Thinking of your tragic life, I vaguely thought of a possibility. Ning Ke asked, what possibility? Yi Hongyu said, the true meaning of the paper sword is not that it is so thin that there is no gap that it cannot penetrate and kill everyone. It is also not that it is the majestic momentum of the vast ocean falling from the sky. It is the simplest principle of water flow. All the water in the world will inevitably flow downwards and cannot be traced back. This is absolute no return. In other words, you will do what you think is right. In this aspect, there is no doubt that you are a powerhouse. Ning Ke said with a smile, so this is the principle. I originally thought that you were going to say that I am a despicable person, so I can understand such a despicable swordsmanship. There is more today. I will finish the second volume. When will I finish it? I don't know. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 490. Ning Ke looked at Yi Hongyu and said, you understood this, so you left Chang'an. Yi Hongyu said, yes. Ning Ke said, but you haven't thanked me yet. Yi Hongyu said, this is my sword. You should thank me. Ning Ke said, we don't need to thank each other. Yi Hongyu said, we don't owe each other anything. After saying this, she turned around and left. The thin snow gradually flew and her indigo dress gradually fluttered. Looking at the back of the Taoist girl gradually disappearing in the wind and snow, Ning Ke was silent. He and the Tao addict were life and death enemies in the wilderness. They were comrades who fought side by side in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. Now, they had spent half a year together in the house by the Yanming Lake. Although they did not have much friendship, they were familiar with each other's existence. He thought that if she could survive this trip, they would probably fight again with swords drawn. Either he or she would die. Thinking of this, he could not help but sigh. Finally, he said to Sang Sang, I admire this woman very much. Because of the battle between Ning Ke and Xia Ho at the Winter Lake, many powerhouses came to Chang'an. Although the abbey dean of the Jishou Abbey and the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong Temple did not appear, the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace, the great divine priest, and some Vedantas of the Buddhism sect did not come, the scene was shocking enough. The world wayfarers of Taoism and Buddhism sects and the minister of offerings of Qinghe County all appeared by the Yanming Lake. Although the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom only sent an inconspicuous messenger, everyone knew that he represented Lu Bai. The most unexpected thing was that the Devil's Doctrine suzerain, the 23-year cicada cultivation, reappeared in the world. With so many powerhouses gathered in Chang'an, they were most concerned about the ending of Xia Ho, the Taoist sect's guest elder, and the legend that Ning Ke was the son of Yama. However, if one thought about it carefully, they could taste more meaning. It seemed to be a cautious test of the academy by the cultivation world. Faced with this test, the academy did not do much. Mr. Second sat on the snow bridge for a night, Mr. First chatted with Yi Su for a night, and then chatted with Qi Mian for a long time. In the end, Ning Ke defeated Xia Ho in a way that shocked the entire cultivation world. 23-year cicada cultivation disappeared mysteriously again. Qi Mian, the world wayfarer of Xiankong Temple, meditated in the Wanyan Tower for 10 days after hearing a long speech from the eldest brother of the academy, and then left Chang'an. These things once again proved a truth that the academy could not be shaken. The people of General Xiaoho's mansion left Chang'an, and so did Yi Hongyu. A few days later, even Yi Su was ready to leave, so the eldest brother of the academy came to see him off. Yi Su looked at the renovated little Taoist temple and thought that his sweat might have fallen on the black roof tiles and thick beams. He felt somewhat happy. After a while, his smile faded and he said, "I still don't understand." Eldest brother knew what he was confused about. He smiled and said, "Tang's fist, Lu Bai's sword, Yen Sei's fu paper, the Back Mountain's knives and arrows, and Sang Sang, the successor of the great divine priest of light. How could Xiahou not be defeated? Besides, he is a member of the academy. How could he not win?" Yi Su was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he laughed loudly and said, "How could a member of the academy not win? What an unreasonable statement." His laughter echoed on the snowy street. This proud successor of the Jishou Abbey had entered the human realm to cultivate in Chang'an. He had a lucky chance in the broken eaves of the street and the ruins of the little Taoist temple. His extremely high state had been improved again. When he heard the words about the academy, he finally understood the cause of everything and floated away. After confirming that Chang'an had really returned to peace and that no one tried to test the academy, Ning Ke would not continue to stay in the house by the lake. He took Sang Sang to the house of red sleeves. Mistress Jian sighed and said, "You are becoming more and more like him." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "Youngest uncle and I are not like each other." Mistress Jian said, "You have not met your youngest uncle. But I know I don't look like him. Because youngest uncle is a free and easy person, and I can never live a free and easy life." Ning Ke laughed and said, "Of course, I can learn from him in the future." Then, the two left the house of red sleeves and sat in a black horse carriage out of the Vermilion Bird Gate. They went along the straight official road covered with snow and came to the mountain in the south of the city. Then, they drove directly into the academy. Ning Ke did not know the truth and details of what had happened in Chang'an during the battle between him and Xiahou. It seemed that the senior brothers of the academy did not help him, but he was very clear that they must have done a lot of things in silence under such a difficult situation. In the hut, he took Sang Sang and bowed deeply to eldest brother and second brother to express their gratitude. Then, he thanked fourth brother, sixth brother and seventh sister, the talisman arrow, the iron knife and the array by the lake. The senior brothers and sisters accepted Ning Ke's salute calmly, reservedly, or perhaps proudly. Second brother, who was usually the most indifferent, looked extremely gentle at this time. It seemed that Ning Ke, as a senior brother, felt deeply honored that his youngest brother could defeat and kill Xiahou. Third sister, Yu Lian, was not at the back of the mountain. As usual, she was writing hairpin-style small regular script by the east window of the old library. She looked calm and focused. Suddenly, she looked up at the falling snowflakes outside the window and smiled. She raised her hand to her lips and gently breathed out the hot air, feeling much warmer. Tang Xiaotang was her disciple. She had no homework today, so she was grinding the ink in the old library. At this time, the little girl's hands were already sore, but her little face was still full of sweet smile. Third sister was a little confused and asked, "What makes you so happy?" "My brother has always wanted to kill the traitor Xiahou. I heard that he was seriously injured in the wilderness to kill him. He must be very happy to know this news." Tang Xiaotang raised her arm and wiped away the tears of happiness. She looked at her teacher and nodded hard. She smiled and said, "If the headmaster is still alive, he must be very happy." One day, the snow in Chang'an suddenly became heavy and fell on the city. It was a violent mess. Ning Ke happened to go to the tombs on that day, so he had to go out of the city against the wind and snow. Ning Ke and Sang Sang first went to the grave in the deep grass near the academy and talked to Yen Sei about some boring things. Then he poured a jar of new wine in front of the grave and took out an undergarment that still had its fragrance from his bosom. He covered it with the wind and snow and burned it. Sang Sang said uneasily, "Will Dewdrop be angry?" Ning Ke said, "How will she know if you don't tell her?" After finishing these things, he and Sang Sang took a carriage to another cemetery. They followed the address that the bodyguard office helped them to find. After many turns in the forest of tombstones, they finally found Darky's grave. Ning Ke gently brushed away the snow on the tombstone and looked at the name. He said with a sense of guilt, when we were young, we agreed that if someone died first, the one who killed Xia Ho would bring his head to the grave of the one who died first. I'm sorry that I didn't do it. Xia Ho's body was sealed in the coffin after being fished out of the lake by the military. I was also embarrassed to break the coffin and behead him. But I heard that he looked very miserable, like a piece of meat stewed in a pot. After saying these disgusting words, Ning Ke laughed happily. Then he took the 2 parts of the dark and heavy broken spear from Song Song's hands and deeply put them into the frozen soil of the tomb, like 2 long sticks of incense. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 491. In the past few years, Ning Ke had not come to pay his respects to Darky in order not to attract attention. Now that he had gotten his revenge, even if the imperial court knew about his relationship with Darky, they would not have to worry. Since he had gotten his revenge, he should pay his respects to his parents first. However, after the murder case, the bodies of Ning Ke's biological parents, Lin Hai and Li Sanyang, were burned into ashes and scattered into the Wei River after a simple worship by Haotian Taoism. There was no cemetery. Then Darky's grave could be counted as the graves of those people. The wind and snow became stronger and stronger. Sang Sang opened the big black umbrella and held it tightly with both hands to cover his back. Ning Ke squatted down and took out a piece of oiled paper from his arms and burned it. There were many names written on the oiled paper. The people behind those names were all dead. Just like the oiled paper, they turned into smoke and were instantly blown away by the wind and snow. Sang Sang whispered, "What about His Highness?" Ning Ke looked at the rolling ashes on the snow and said, "He only talked back then. Now he has paid a price for not becoming a prince. Let's watch him for another 2 years." Sang Sang said, "Young master, don't you always say that you want to kill the chief evil?" Ning Ke said, "The chief evil is your teacher, but he is already dead. When I looked at his grave, I thought about digging it up. But I gave up." When Chang'an was shrouded in the wind and snow, the deep mountains of the West Hill Divine Kingdom were still as warm as spring. This had something to do with the warm current on the sea outside the Song Kingdom's dike in the east. It was also because this was originally a place favored by Haotian. A young man stood outside the simple Taoist temple in the deep mountains. The man was extremely handsome. Although there were a few eye-catching scars on his cheeks, they added to his charm. The middle-aged Taoist on the stone steps looked at the young man and said, "Prince Longqing, do you really insist on entering the temple to cultivate? Do you know what this means?" The young man turned out to be Prince Longqing. There were calluses and rust marks on his palms. Perhaps he had spent the past few days on the sea. He said respectfully, "Since it is the teacher's order, as a disciple, I dare not disobey. As long as I can see the tomes of arcane, I don't care how much pain and torture I have to endure." The middle-aged Taoist said, "Since it is the Abbey Dean's intention, no one will stop you. But I have to remind you that with your current state, you may die at any time if you want to read the tomes of arcane." Longqing said calmly, "Martial uncle, I am a dead man now." The middle-aged Taoist priest looked at the black peach blossom on Longqing's chest and thought of the rumor that Ning Ke had pierced through this man's chest with an arrow on the snow cliff. He understood what Longqing meant by the so-called dead man. He sighed and said nothing more. He walked up the stone steps and entered the unknown place of Jishou Abbey. Although Longqing had already become the disciple of the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey, he was still a little nervous. At the lakeside in the depths of the Taoist temple, there were 7 splendid thatched cottages in picturesque disorder. The thatched cottages were paved with grass, cheap and shabby. They shouldn't have any dignified and luxurious aura, but the thatched cottages were like gold and jade, disregarding the years of dust and wind, appearing extremely magnificent. This kind of grass naturally contained extremely rich qi of heaven and earth. It could resist the cold aura of wind and rain and help people calm down. It had long been extinct in the natural world and could be said to be extremely precious. There were only 2 places in the world that were luxurious enough to use this kind of thatched cottages. One was the cottage by the lakeside that was responsible for storing the 7 volumes of tomes of arcane, and the other was the drafty thatched cottage that the headmaster of the academy lived in. Long Qing walked into the first cottage and looked at the classic on the agarwood table, which was covered in black blood. He could no longer keep his calm, and his hands that were exposed outside his sleeves trembled slightly. This classic was the first volume of the tomes of arcane, the hand scroll. This was also the only volume of the tomes of arcane that he could open at his current state. Long Qing slowly opened the black cover. The first page that came into view was a snow-white piece of paper. Then he turned to the second page. On this piece of paper were written the names of Lu Bai, Jun Mo, Tang. These were the most powerful cultivators in the world. Because he had already expected it, he was not surprised. He just silently thought that if he wanted to climb to the highest peak of cultivation in the future, then these shining names must be the stepping stones under his feet. Long Qing continued to read the hand scroll. At the top of this piece of paper, he saw the name of the calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan. Then, he saw the names of Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu at the top of this piece of paper. These 2 names were almost completely parallel, and each stroke broke out of the paper, as if they were going to pierce into the previous page. Looking at these 3 names, Long Qing's eyes became extremely resentful, and his breathing became much heavier. However, after a moment, all the emotions inexplicably disappeared. His eyes returned to extreme calmness, and became brighter and brighter, like a night pearl that had been painted with a golden luster, incomparably bright. Winter turned to spring, and time passed day by day. No one in the world knew that Prince Long Qing, who was thought to be dead, was now concentrating on cultivation and learning in the Jishou Abbey, an unknown place. When he woke up every morning, he would start to clean the front of the abbey, cook food, prepare daily necessities, and send them to the back of the abbey. After he was done with his work, he could only go to the 7 thatched cottages to read the tomes of arcane. After reading the hand scroll on the first day, Long Qing did not open it again. Instead, he put all his spirit and will into reading the 2nd volume of the tomes of arcane. One spring day, wild peaches bloomed both inside and outside the Jishou Abbey. Long Qing came out of the 2nd thatched cottage with a pale face. He held a blood-stained towel tightly in his hand, and was about to meditate and rest by the lake. Suddenly, he felt something and stopped in his tracks. He walked into the first thatched cottage and opened the hand scroll with a solemn expression. On that page, the ink of the 2 words, Ning Ke, became thicker and thicker, as if blood was about to seep into the paper. Mo Shanshan's name left its original position and moved to the top of the paper. There was a stone pillar with sharp edges between the 2 words, as if it would burst the paper at any time. Long Qing's face became paler, and his pupils suddenly shrank like dark holes. What shocked and angered him was not what he saw, but what he did not see. He did not see Yi Hongyu's name. Yi Hongyu's name had already gone somewhere else. Peach Mountain was in late spring. Although the newly planted peach blossoms were not as dazzling as rumored, the trees were lush and the divine hall above was shrouded in dense green, looking extremely solemn. On the stone divine path between the green trees, a girl walked slowly. She had a simple Taoist bun and wore a green Taoist robe. The green color was not very eye-catching, but when the Taoist robe slowly fluttered in the mountain wind, the green on the 1,000-year-old stone trees beside the divine path all lost their color. The girl with the Taoist bun walked calmly along the long divine path. Soon, she came to the vast and flat cliff platform. She looked at the black divine hall of judgment in the distance and smiled. On the cliff platform in front of the divine hall, there were countless exclamations. Yi Hongyu is back. How dare this woman come back? Tao addict. Go and inform the great divine priest. Priest, long time no see. The girl from Haotian Taoism walked slowly. She was extremely beautiful, but her aura was extremely simple. But in the eyes of the crowd, this was the most terrible scene they had ever seen. The divine priests and deacons around the divine hall exclaimed and scattered in all directions. Those who could not retreat in time bowed in horror and greeted her with trembling voices. Last spring, Tao addict Yi Hongyu left the West Hill Divine Palace. She lived in Chang'an for a while and then disappeared without a trace. But this spring, she came back. Chen Bachi, the former commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, was blinded by a paper sword. Then, his tongue was smashed by the great divine priest of Revelation's dry fingers. He became a real cripple. But after all, he was a trusted follower of Luo Kadi, so he could still live happily in the extremely realistic judicial department. If basking in the sun every day on the stone steps could be considered a kind of happiness, Yi Hongyu walked to the stone steps of the Divine Hall of Judgment and looked at Chen Bachi, who was dressed luxuriously but lying in the sun like a beggar. She said calmly, "Have you ever thought that I could come back?" Many divine priests and deacons in the distance looked over, but no one dared to do anything to Yi Hongyu. It was not because the Tao addict's prestige still existed, but because the great divine priest of Revelation was furious because the Tao addict had left the mountain after he returned to the Peach Mountain last year. He even had a fight with the great divine priest of Judgment that no one knew about. Chen Bachi had heard people's exclamations earlier. Hearing Yi Hongyu's voice, he finally confirmed that what he was most afraid of had finally happened. His face was full of fear. He wanted to beg for mercy and also wanted to warn Yi Hongyu that this was before the Divine Hall. He wanted to use the prestige of the great divine priest of Judgment and Luo Kadi to save his life. But he could not speak now. Even if he could speak, Yi Hongyu was not prepared to listen. She just wanted to enter the Divine Hall of Judgment and had to climb the stone steps. And this person happened to be basking on the stone steps, so she spoke casually. After saying this, she walked past Chen Bachi. A spring breeze blew gently, ruffling the ancient trees around the Divine Hall and wrinkling Yi Hongyu's sleeves. A tiny wrinkle appeared on her green sleeves, which was shaped like a sword. The invisible Taoist sword appeared. Chen Bachi's throat was cut and he died on the spot. Yi Hongyu did not look back and continued to walk up the stone steps. More than 100 divine priests and deacons walked to the stone steps of the Divine Hall and looked up. They were shocked to see the green robe slowly walking up the stone steps. The dark and solemn Divine Hall of Judgment was extremely tall and solemn. Compared to it, Yi Hongyu, who was standing in front of the hall, seemed so small. But she did not stop and walked in calmly and naturally. It was like coming home. When she walked into the Divine Hall of Judgment, she was no longer small. In a house somewhere in the capital of the Great River Kingdom, the sound of a baby crying could be heard. The maids and servants in the courtyard were busy with joy. The owner of the house was a Tang, which was a good thing for the people of the Great River Kingdom. Moreover, this owner was gentle, had a deep relationship with his wife, and treated his servants generously. He was the best owner. Today, their owner was pregnant, and they were also happy. The woman lying on the bed looked pale and her forehead was full of sweat. She looked extremely tired. But looking at the baby in her husband's arms, she still could not hide her excitement. She murmured, "It's a pity that it's a daughter. I'll give you a son next time." The middle-aged man sitting by the bed looked at his wife and comforted her with the baby in his arms. "It's best to have a daughter. In the future, let her enter the black ink garden to learn calligraphy and be elegant. If she gives birth to a naughty boy, it will be difficult to arrange. Who knows when he will learn to climb over walls and join those Jianghu people." The woman said angrily, "How can you say that?" The middle-aged man looked at the baby girl in his arms and said nervously, "Why is she so small? How old can a newborn child be?" The woman suddenly became nervous and said in a trembling voice, "Master, are we really going back to Chang, and in the autumn?" The middle-aged man smiled and said, "Father is old. Now that we have a child, we have to bring her back to make him happy. You don't have to worry about those trivial things. I'll take care of everything." The woman always thought that her husband was the most reassuring person in the world. Hearing this, she was really relieved and began to think about other things. She asked, "What should we name the child?" After returning to Chang'an, "We'll wait for father to give us a name." The middle-aged man thought that when they returned to Chang'an, His Majesty would definitely rush to give him a name when he knew that he had a daughter. He could not help but smile bitterly and said, "Let's give her a nickname first." "What should we call her?" "The village we met was rich in pumpkins." "How about Little Pumpkin?" "Whatever you say." The word "born" was used to describe the birth of a new life. Sometimes, it was used to describe the relaxed mood after things were settled. In the Mogan Mountains in the west of the Great River Kingdom, there was a quiet lake. This quiet lake was the most famous ink lake in the Great River Kingdom. Mo Shanshan sat by the ink lake with a stone in her hand. She seemed to be ready to throw it into the lake or put it beside her, but she was still hesitating. On the ground beside her, there were already 7 or 8 stones scattered around. Some were round, some were square, and some were in different shapes. There seemed to be no order to their placement, but it gave people a feeling of extreme emptiness. This emptiness was like the stomach after starving for 5 days, or like an empty wineskin. The night wind blew gently. Mo Shanshan frowned, her thin and sparse eyelashes fluttering gently. Her originally slightly round cheeks had become thinner, making her even more beautiful. However, there was no self-pity or remorse on her pale cheeks. She was extremely focused, and even seemed to be in pain because she was thinking. After an unknown amount of time, she finally put down the stone in her hand. The stone seemed to be placed randomly in the middle of the 7 or 8 stones on the ground. However, at this moment, something very strange happened. It was like a person who had been hungry for several days suddenly ate a large bucket of hard rice, or like someone threw a knife into a wineskin. A strong sense of sharpness suddenly enveloped the ink lake. Many waves appeared on the calm lake surface, as if even the lake water had sensed the rugged feeling that stretched between heaven and earth and blocked people's hearts. Mo Shanshan looked at the scattered stones around her and knew that she had finally succeeded in setting up a part of the stone array tactics. Her lake-like eyes became brighter and brighter, and her red lips were tightly pressed together because of joy. At this moment, she remembered the words she wrote in the letter. "After so many things, the rivers and mountains in my eyes have a new meaning. On the day we meet again, what I write will definitely be more magnificent than what I write today. I hope you will also work harder and not let me down." The girl stood up and looked to the distant north. "Thinking of that hateful guy," she said sweetly and proudly, "I have already known my destiny. Will you let me down?" Peerless figures like Kuhaoran, the youngest uncle of the academy, and Master Lotus had long disappeared, leaving only a few traces in the world. However, even these traces were extremely precious treasures. Back in the Tianqi Mountains in the depths of the wilderness, Ning Ke, Mo Shanshan, and Yi Hongyu fought against each other and entered the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. In the process, they saw the great blockage formation set up by the great divine priest of light who founded the Devil's Doctrine. They saw the shocking sword marks left by Mr. Ku when he broke the stone array tactics. They saw the letter left by Kuhaoran in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, the traces of that battle, and most importantly, Lotus who was still alive. That was a bloody encounter. The 3 young experts of the cultivation world suffered great devastation both mentally and physically in front of this old monster, and they also gained extremely valuable experience. These experiences settled in their spiritual world, and then gradually began to be released and began to play a role. Ning Ke killed Xia Ho, Mo Shanshan entered the knowing destiny state, and Yi Hongyu bravely walked into the divine hall of judgment, all thanks to the trip to the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. In a sense, neither youngest uncle nor Lotus had really died. The mantle of these 2 peerless powerhouses had been inherited by Ning Ke and the other 2 in a new way. Standing on the precipice at the back of the mountain of the academy and looking at Chang and city in the distance, Ning Ke recalled what had happened in the past 2 years. Climbing the old library, climbing the 2nd floor, comprehending talisman Taoism, entering the wilderness, inheriting the Great Spirit, and cultivating and fighting that he could never imagine before. Then he remembered what Xiaoho had said before he died and frowned slightly. He felt that there were invisible black clouds floating above Chang and city that was covered by the clear spring sunshine. He thought that he could not be the son of Yama. Although he had died once, in a sense, he had seen Yama, but that Yama was obviously not the same Yama in this world. But if he was not the son of Yama, why did the great divine priest of light cause such a bloody storm? Why did the Buddhism sect send people to see him and even kill him? He could not see the future clearly, and he did not know whether the Buddhism sect would be peaceful. Ning Ke slightly clenched his fists and made a decision. He would not attend the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival in autumn. At this moment, the lively music and noise forcibly pulled him out of the high-level emotions such as sighing and vigilance, and pulled him back to the scene of the spring outing. Today was the spring outing in the back mountain of the academy. Under the organization of the headmaster of the academy, no disciple dared not to come. Anyway, the inhibition of the cliff cave had been removed, so the senior brothers who liked to play chess played chess in the cave. The senior brothers who liked to play the zither and flute sang and played songs in the cave. Those who liked to embroider continued to embroider, those who liked to read continued to read, those who liked to write small regular script continued to write small regular script, those who liked to chat continued to chat, and those who liked to pretend to be lonely continued to pretend to be lonely. These were all very elegant hobbies, but when these hobbies appeared at the same time in the cliff cave, it suddenly became vulgar because it was too noisy, too much like the scene of performing on the streets in Chang'an. Sang Sang was the one who really worked hard today, because she was responsible for preparing the food, and under Chen Pipi's strong request, she boiled 3 large urns of chicken soup. "Young master, drink it quickly. It's the freshest." Sang Sang carried a bowl of chicken soup, quietly walked to the cliff edge, and handed it to him. Ning Ke looked at her slightly messy hair and the grass dust on her face, and could not help but feel a little distressed. He said angrily, "Chen Pipi made a fool of you, and you actually listened to him. Is the chicken soup calligraphy and chicken soup the same thing? The chicken soup calligraphy is sold for a lot of silver, but does that make the chicken soup more precious?" Sang Sang smiled and did not say anything. In fact, she was very happy that people in the academy liked to drink the chicken soup she made. She reminded him, "This chicken is very good, and it can produce a lot of oil. There is a thick layer of soup floating on top, so it looks like there is no heat, but in fact it is very hot. It will not cool in a short time. Young master, you should blow on it before drinking." Sang Sang went to the hut to prepare salad and steamed buns in the big pot. Eldest brother walked out of the cliff cave, stood beside Ning Ke, and looked in the direction of Chang'an. Ning Ke handed the bowl to him and said, "Senior brother, this is the freshest bowl." Eldest brother smiled and shook his head. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "Younger brother, actually I have a question in my heart. I know this question is wrong, but it always makes me a little flustered." Ning Ke said, "Senior brother, please tell me." Eldest brother looked at the distant Chang'an city, frowned slightly, and asked, 15 years ago, when you picked up the knife in the woodshed, did you ever think that the general's son was actually innocent?" Ning Ke was slightly stunned, and after thinking for a moment, he said, "It was very chaotic at that time, and I really don't know what I was thinking at that time. But I will naturally understand later." Then he sincerely asked, "Senior brother, if you were in the same situation at that time, what would you choose?" Eldest brother said, "Without personal experience, even the most touching choice might just be false sensationalism. But if it were me now, I would probably choose to do nothing." Ning Ke knew that eldest brother was speaking from the bottom of his heart. Sacrificing the innocent for his own survival was probably not a choice that eldest brother would make. He said, "Senior brother, you are a benevolent person." He continued, "Second brother is a man of ideals, but it is really difficult for me to be one. I am just a selfish person, and I only want to survive." Eldest brother patted him on the shoulder and said, "Teacher once said that selfishness is the biggest driving force for human beings to move forward. Although I don't really understand this saying, I think there must be a reason behind it. Younger brother, your choice is not wrong, at least I am not qualified to say that you are wrong. It is not that there must be a reason, but it is very reasonable. The headmaster walked to the edge of the cliff and said, "There is no purpose in life, only the process. How can there be right and wrong?" Eldest brother said, "Right and wrong are the benevolence of human beings." The headmaster pointed to the blue sky and a few white clouds above and said, "The higher you fly, the smaller your image in the eyes of people on the ground, until you become inhuman. You are not even a human, so how can there be benevolence? If there is no benevolence, how can there be right and wrong?" Eldest brother shook his head and said, "Teacher, you are wrong. During our travels, you often told me that it would be too cold to leave the human world, so if we stay in the human world, we must be human. Since we are human, we are one of the living beings in the world. How can we not have a sense of right and wrong?" Ning Ke was shocked. The headmaster had never thought that the most honest eldest disciple would dare to say that he was wrong to his face, and even use his own words to slap his own face. He was so angry that his beard fluttered, and he glared at him and scolded, "Li Man Man. How dare you?" Eldest brother said nervously, "Teacher often reminds me to learn more from Jun Mo and youngest brother. That is why I said those words. If you don't like it, I will take them back." Ning Ke listened by the side and tried to hold back his laughter until his stomach ached. At this moment, he really could not hold it anymore and burst out laughing. He waved his hands and said, "You guys talk first, I will go see if the steamed buns are ready." The headmaster glared at him and said, "You are the one who caused all this trouble, and you still want to escape." After saying this, he saw the bowl of chicken soup in Ning Ke's hands and praised, "The oil is crystal clear, and the soup is clear and rich. What a good bowl of soup." Ning Ke's expression was slightly stiff. The headmaster flicked his sleeves and snatched the bowl of chicken soup from Ning Ke's hands. He drank it in one gulp, and his expression did not change. Ning Ke was shocked and speechless. He thought that the headmaster was really powerful. Then, the headmaster's expression suddenly changed, and he spat out all the chicken soup in his mouth. His clothes and beard were dripping with oil, and he looked very embarrassed. "Hot!" The headmaster shouted in anger and pain, and even his tone changed. Sang Sang, who was picking wisteria under the roofed corridor, asked confusedly, "Should I add sugar to the chicken soup?" There was a burst of laughter by the cliff. Volume 2, The End of the Lake in Winter. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 492. At this moment, I was indeed a little tired. I had originally wanted to write it tomorrow, but tomorrow was the beginning of the next volume. I was most afraid that I would not be able to write it if I left it until tomorrow. Thus, I would casually chat with everyone for a while. I was quite satisfied with the last chapter. I picked up all the things at the beginning and extended it to the huge plot of joining the devil. Looking back, it was probably more vivid. In any world, when the previous generation dies and the next generation grows up, there will be such things as inheritance. The North Sea volume of the Qinyu era talked about the inheritance of power. In this volume, there were also some parts that talked about inheritance, but it was relatively more ethereal. I wanted to talk about the inheritance of willpower and spirit. Although I did not have such things, it did not mean that the people in the story could not have them. This volume was very long. After careful consideration, I was sure that some of the plots could be written more concisely and quickly. However, when I was writing, it was really difficult to control. These were definitely the correct conclusions after looking back. However, I had been constantly making corrections. For example, in terms of the plots, there were many parts that could be written in detail, so I simplified them. For example, in terms of the dialogues, my dialogues were much simpler and clearer than before. I had once said that it had the feeling of the Vermilion Bird era, and it was indeed true. Back then, I wrote dialogues like this, and I liked it. The reason why the second volume, Lake of Winter, was so long was because there was too much content. The Desolate Man, War, the opening of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, the Ming hand scroll of the Tomes of Arcane, the inheritance of the Great Spirit, the birth of Lotus 32, joining the Devil, the revelation of Song Song's birth, the inheritance of the light, the two of them killing Xia Ho, and so on. All kinds of important characters appeared one after another, leading to the big show at the end. Joining the Devil and killing Xia Ho were the two longest plots. Of course, it was because they were the most important. There was a separate chapter on joining the Devil. Other than joining the Devil, it was more important to talk about the background of the previous generation, as well as the root of the conflict in this story. Of course, killing Xia Ho was also important. That was the biggest goal of Ning Kei's life in the first half of his life. However, I thought that from the beginning of the book, no one would think that Xia Ho was the big boss. Yes, there were many bosses in this story, but it could also be said that there were no bosses. As I said before, I hope to write this story happily, simply, and pleasantly. Then, I wanted to use as few twists and turns as possible. Simple is powerful. Don't I often say this nonsense? The curtain of this world had already been pulled open. Most of the characters had already appeared on stage. Next, they had to perform on this stage. I did not know whether they would sing well or not. Anyway, I would try my best to write. The content of the next volume was not to mention. I wanted to try to write as much to them as possible. To be honest, though I have been anxiously preparing for the third volume these last few days, I have not even thought of a title. Although I have been anxiously preparing for the third volume these days, I have not even thought of a title. The second volume, Winter Lake, starts from the north of Yen Kingdom. In the middle is the Daming Lake of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, and then Yenming Lake. It is very relevant. I am very satisfied. I hope that I can think of a good title for the third volume tomorrow. The long and difficult second volume has ended. I am very happy. I feel complete. Thank you. I hope that everyone is happy. Then, we will continue to be happy. I will continue to write. However, in September, I will accompany my parents on a trip. The manuscript that I mentioned at the beginning of the month has already disappeared. So, there will be very few updates. I would like to report this to you in advance. Then, please allow me to recommend a book to you. The title is called Inheritance of the Dark Knight. The book number is 2424299. It is an Oriental fantasy story. The reason why I recommend this book is because I know that the author has put a lot of effort into it. Alright, I will not lie. This author is my good friend in life. We often eat, drink, and chat. I know this guy very well. He has a good job, but he is born to write. So, if you are interested, please support him. I will be very grateful. Finally, do you want a monthly ticket? Yes. As I said before, students who do not update well and have requirements in this area do not need to vote for me. For students who have been tormented by me in this area, please do not vote for others. You must vote for me. I want both monthly and recommendation tickets. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidyan. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 493. For a country, the year was like a person's name. It was not necessarily resounding, but it must be there. Therefore, every country in the world had its own year. But there were only two kinds of years that could be remembered by the people and used effectively in daily life. Time passed, and it was the 16th year of Tianxi era in the Tang Empire, which was the 3447th year of Daji of West Hill. Many things happened in the spring of this year. Yi Hongyu, the Tao addict, finally returned after leaving the West Hill Divine Palace for a whole year. She killed Shinbachi under countless horrified gazes and then walked into the Black Divine Hall of Judgment. The moment she stepped into the Divine Hall, a majestic voice sounded from the depths of the hall. A huge sound wave hit the wall made of black boulders, shattering into countless fine and ear-piercing sounds that were as sharp as steel needles. They instantly came in front of her and shrouded her body. You are the first person to betray the divine hall and dare to come back. Are you here to be punished? The majestic voice pierced her eardrums like thousands of steel needles. Yi Hongyu frowned slightly but did not respond. She just looked indifferently into the depths of the divine hall. There was a dazzling bead curtain in the depths of the divine hall. Behind the bead curtain, a huge blood-colored black jade throne could be vaguely seen, and the majestic figure on the throne could be seen. Just like in the past years, the voice that came from the black jade throne stirred up cold divine power and looked down on everything in the world. Today, there was even some mockery in it. Yi Hongyu was extremely devout, truly devout. Therefore, she did not think that her leaving the West Hill Divine Palace was a betrayal. But she did not want to defend herself to the voice behind the curtain. She just wanted to walk to the bead curtain and finish what she was going to do. She thought so she did it. She walked quietly into the divine hall of judgment. Her cyan Taoist robe fluttered slowly on the black smooth ground, like a green leaf walking in the dark night. It was inconspicuous but very eye-catching. A priest of the judicial department stood beside the stone pillar and looked at her and shouted, "How dare you!" Another priest from the judicial department shouted furiously, "How dare you!" More and more heavenly officials rushed out, their red robes surging on the vast black ground like blood. However, they gathered together to form a lake of blood. Furious and cold shouts of rebuke continuously rang out, "Impudent!" Yi Hongyu's thunderous rebuke did not change her expression at all. She was still as calm and indifferent as ever. Every step she took was exactly the same distance. Yi Hongyu's faith in Haotian was impeccable, but she was not one of those foolish believers who cried when they saw the divine temple. She respected nothing but Haotian. That was why she did not choose to give in when she was pressured by the hierarch and the great divine priest of judgment. Instead, she left the West Hill Divine Palace resolutely and did not hesitate to bear the crime of being a traitor of Haotian Taoism. That was why she returned to the West Hill Divine Palace today and walked towards the bead curtain. She was an extremely impudent person in the first place. Everything she did was extremely impudent, so how could she be moved at all when the red-robed divine officials in the black divine hall berated her for being impudent? She walked towards the depths of the divine hall. Those heavenly officials from the judicial department wearing blood-red robes were extremely angry. They were trembling with anger and their faces were red. However, it was strange that no one dared to stand in front of her and attack her. Yi Hongyu walked into the crowd of heavenly officials. The heavenly officials retreated in horror and made a path for her. It was like a green leaf falling into a bloody lake of blood. The lake water parted and retreated towards the shore, not daring to touch the green leaf. Finally, she walked from the outside of the divine hall to the bead curtain. She stopped and calmly looked over. Behind the bead curtain, the great divine priest of judgment sat on the seat of heavenly black jade. He rested his chin on his hand and seemed to be thinking about something complicated. Yi Hongyu bowed her head and looked calm. It was just like before she went to the wilderness. Every time she came to the divine hall, she would meet the great divine priest of judgment behind the curtain. Bowing represented respect, and lowering her head represented obedience. The great divine priest of judgment raised his head slightly. His cold and powerful eyes passed through the bead curtain and fell on her. He said calmly and unquestionably, "Kneel down." This voice was not very loud, but it made those red-robed divine priests who were in a daze wake up and understand a lot of things. The anger and dissatisfaction that came from being belittled and challenged immediately overwhelmed the prestige that the name Tao addict had left to them in the past few years. Even if you had a chance to regain your strength, even if you were still the terrible Tao addict, this was the divine hall of judgment. Behind the bead curtain was the invincible great divine priest of judgment. What else could you do but kneel down? They raised their arms and pointed at Yi Hongyu, who was bowing her head in front of the bead curtain. They shouted in unison, "Kneel down! Kneel down! Kneel down. These voices were either angry, excited, cold, or cruel. They gradually converged and became very orderly, like thunder echoing in the quiet black divine hall. When Yi Hongyu was still the Tao addict, she never knelt in front of the bead curtain, even if the great divine priest of judgment was behind the curtain. Later, when she was not the Tao addict, she once knelt in front of the bead curtain. That time, the divine hall of judgment deliberately gave her pressure and infinite humiliation. From that day on, she vowed that unless she could once again gain the power not to kneel, she would never step into the divine hall of judgment again. Today, she walked into the divine hall of judgment, so of course, she would not kneel again. I only kneel to those who deserve it, Yi Hongyu said. Behind the bead curtain, the great divine priest of judgment slowly sat up and said indifferently, for example? Yi Hongyu said, for example, Haotian, the Abbey Dean, the hierarch, the great divine priest of revelation, and divine Lord Lotus. But your name is not among these examples. The great divine priest of judgment said in a cold voice, how dare you compare me with that devil Lotus? Yi Hongyu said, divine priest, you are not even one petal of divine Lord Lotus. It is indeed wrong to compare you with him. The great divine priest of judgment suddenly laughed. His laughter was full of ruthlessness and coldness. Don't think that because you have a brother, I really dare not to kill you. Don't forget that this is the divine hall of judgment. We have the special rules bestowed by Haotian. Yi Hongyu raised her head and said coldly, the anger of judgment should turn into the divine fire of Haotian, but the anger of the great divine priest can only turn into laughter. It is really ridiculous. There was a slight sound of surprise behind the bead curtain. As Yi Hongyu raised her head, the great divine priest of judgment found something very unexpected and interesting, so he decided to let her live. I didn't expect that you not only recovered your state, but also succeeded in breaking the realm. It is really beyond my expectation. You know the rules of the divine hall of judgment very well. Then come back and be a priest again. The divine hall of judgment punished the world on behalf of Haotian. It followed an unusually realistic and cold rule. Strength represented everything, and the weak should be bullied. Whether it was power or rank, it was only related to strength. If you were no longer strong, then you were no longer qualified to have power and status, and even should not be alive. If you became strong again, then you could have power and status again. Yi Hongyu forced herself to lower her state to escape in the wilderness. Her strength was seriously damaged, and there was no hope of recovery. So she saw coldness and suffered a lot of humiliation. Now that she had recovered and even had more powerful strength, then she was no longer qualified to be humiliated. However, could those things be erased by the words of the great divine priest of judgment, as if they had never happened? For people outside the divine hall of judgment, this was unimaginable. But for those in the divine hall of judgment, this was a very natural thing. Those priests in red robes heard the order of the great divine priest of judgment and quickly stopped scolding Yi Hongyu. They calmly retreated to the side. In the eyes of these priests of the divine hall of judgment, all Yi Hongyu asked for was this sentence from the great divine priest of judgment. The great divine priest of the West Hill Divine Palace was said to be above the great divine priest of Haotian. He was extremely respected, and even the hierarch lord could not casually scold him. How could he apologize to a mortal? The great divine priest of judgment allowed Yi Hongyu to return to the divine hall and let her continue to be the grand priest of the judicial department. The divine hall of judgment had never been a forgiving place. Yi Hongyu was not a forgiving person either. After hearing the words of the great divine priest of judgment, she smiled slightly. At the moment when the beautiful face revealed a smile, many scenes appeared in front of Yi Hongyu's eyes. On the Yanming Lake in the wind and snow, Ning Ke unbelievably pulled out his padao under the powerful iron spear. However, using the padao as a sword, it was naturally and unstoppably pierced into Xia Ho's abdomen. In the stone house of the West Hill Divine Palace, under the dim light, she tore open the envelope and took out the letter. The clumsy sword on the paper turned into a turbid river. In the mountain of bones, Divine Lord Lotus, who was as skinny as a ghost, grabbed his shoulders tightly. He calmly and mercifully lowered his head and tore off a piece of flesh from his shoulder. At the bottom of the Daming Lake, countless sharp stones blocked the way. She lowered her body and wiped off the green marks on a stone. She saw the 2 sword marks left by Mr. Ku of the academy. Countless scenes flashed in front of Yi Hongyu's eyes. The 2 sword marks finally merged into one, falling on the yellow paper, falling on the snow lake, falling into her eyes, falling into her heart, and into the scabbard at her waist. Yi Hongyu unsheathed her sword. It was this sword. Then she stabbed at the bead curtain. At the great divine priest of judgment. The black divine hall of judgment, shrouded in the beautiful light of late spring, looked especially solemn. At this moment, countless dust rolled out of the hall and rushed along the stone steps to the cliff plateau. In the white divine hall at the highest point, there was a thunderclap, as if even the gods were shocked and confused. In another divine hall, the great divine priest of revelation sighed softly. In the divine hall of judgment, the red-robed priests fell to the ground. The bead curtain had been completely broken. Yi Hongyu stood behind the bead curtain and in front of the throne. Her right hand holding the sword trembled slightly, and her pale face looked extremely indifferent. She pulled the sword out of the chest of the great divine priest of judgment. Countless blood splashed out from the horrible wound on the chest of the great divine priest of judgment, instantly drenching the blood-colored divine robe and staining Yi Hongyu's green Taoist robe. The great divine priest of judgment frowned and looked at the sword wound on his chest. He said, "It doesn't make sense." Yi Hongyu looked at him and said, "You said that this is the rule that Haotian gave us. So as long as I have the ability to kill you, I dare to kill you." The great divine priest of judgment raised his hand in pain and rage, and then died. Yi Hongyu pulled him down from the throne and sat on it herself. Before sitting on the throne, she had to step on the body of the great divine priest of judgment. From now on, she was the great divine priest of judgment. The seat of heavenly black jade was very big, like a sea of blood. Her green Taoist robe was stained red. Sitting on the throne, she was like a very inconspicuous drop of blood in this sea of blood, but it was the thickest and coldest drop. Yesterday, I recommended a book to a friend, but the title of the book was wrong. It should be The Inheritance of the Dark Side. Everyone, please understand. I'm going to the beginning of September. I sincerely ask everyone to vote for me. I will update very little this month, so I'll say it in advance. Goodbye, thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 494. The Jishou Abbey appeared even quieter under the starlight, as if no one had visited it for countless years. The golden thatch hung by the eaves, as if the starlight had become solid. Prince Longqing sat in front of the desk by the window, reading the book in front of him. He completely ignored the ethereal beauty around the Taoist temple. There was only a thirst for new knowledge in his eyes. He seemed so calm and focused, just like the quiet lake in front of the window. When he opened the hand scroll of the tomes of arcane and saw the names of the Tao addict, calligraphy addict, and Ning Ke, he could not help but feel jealousy, hatred, unwillingness, and resentment. As the divine son of West Hill, he should at least stand at the same level as the three of them. However, on the snow cliff in the wilderness, all the good things were destroyed by Ning Ke's arrow. Although he had a great lucky chance at the South Sea and set foot on the road of cultivation again, everything was like starting over again. Now he had just entered the see-through realm and seemed to be getting further and further away. However, it did not take long for him to turn all the negative emotions in his heart into nothingness. Because he was now in the Jishou Abbey, as long as he had the corresponding ability, he could read all the tomes of arcane. This was an unimaginable lucky chance. This was the highest level story in the world. Negative emotions like hatred and resentment were low-level things that only mortals would be immersed in pain for. This did not mean that Longqing no longer hated Ning Ke, nor was he jealous of Yi Hongyu and Mo Shanshan. It was because he understood that all the feelings of hatred and pain were boring processes. What was more important was the result. As long as he could become strong again, or even more powerful, just like the news from the West Hill Divine Palace a few days ago, he could take back everything he had lost like Yi Hongyu, or even more. The tomes of Arcane that Long Qing was reading at this time was the third of the 7 tomes of Arcane, the Sha Hand Scroll. The reason why this tomes of the Arcane was called Sha Hand Scroll was that there were countless cultivation methods recorded in it. Some were exquisite and hard to describe, some were the entry methods of the mountain sects, some were the Shintao of Haotian Taoism, some were the Huayan methods of the Buddhism sect, and even the most mysterious and evil methods of the Devil's Doctrine. Almost all the cultivation methods in the world were recorded in this tome of the Arcane. Only the back of the mountain of the Academy could compete with Hao Han's collection and the quality of the cultivation methods. As for the world-renowned Xinghe County Book Collection building, it was not qualified to be compared with these two. Starlight fell on the pages, illuminating the human figures painted in thick ink. There were countless lines flowing back and forth between the figures. There were countless records of cultivation methods. Long Qing County's cultivation methods flowed at the bottom of the book. This strange cultivation method was called Grey Eye. Grey Eye was neither a Haotian Taoism cultivation method nor a Devil's Doctrine cultivation method. Instead, it was the product of a mighty person of the Jishou Abbey killing an elder of the Devil's Doctrine who cultivated the practice of Tao Tai many years ago. After thinking about the dangers of the battle, he pondered for 3 nights and used his vast knowledge and wisdom to transform the practice of Tao Tai. The foundation of this cultivation method was the Taoist. In essence, it was to seize other cultivators' psyche power and consciousness to strengthen oneself. However, after being transformed by Taoist law, it did not need to devour flesh and blood. It could directly seize consciousness. It did not look as bloody as before. It seemed to be more neutral and peaceful. In fact, it was evil and cruel as before. If he was still the proud and misophobic Prince Long Qing, he would not cultivate such an evil cultivation method, even if he would be tempted by great power. However, he had experienced so many things. He was once filthy, weak, and had done many ugly and evil things. He was no longer the Prince Long Qing of that year. So he did not hesitate to start cultivating. The starlight was like water, cooling the courtyard of the Taoist temple. The hut was relatively dark. Long Qing looked at the Sha hand scroll of the tomes of Arcane. His consciousness moved slowly with this cultivation method. His face became paler and paler. Many days ago, on the South Sea, a small boat rose and fell in the waves. The sun on the sea was unusually hot. The fish had already dived into the deep sea, and the seagulls had naturally disappeared. Long Qing knelt behind the Taoist in indigo, enduring the scorching sun. However, his face did not become dark, but extremely pale. This was the depth of the South Sea. It was tens of thousands of miles away from the land, and the coastline could not be seen. The Taoist in indigo stood on the bow of the boat and watched the waves rolling. It seemed that he was watching the ebb and flow of the tide on the coast. Persistence is an obstacle, even if it is the persistence of light and darkness. The hot wooden board made Long Qing feel as if his knees were about to be scorched. However, he did not dare to move. He said in a trembling voice, "I have tried to stop persistence and go to the night in the north on the wilderness. However, even so, I still did not see the light in the night." The Taoist in indigo stood on the bow of the boat and looked at the sea with his hands behind his back. He said, "You want to find something, so you made a choice. Making a choice is a kind of persistence." Long Qing asked, "Then how can I not be persistent?" The Taoist in indigo said, "Buddhism pays attention to meditation. What we pursue is loneliness. Not being persistent means not moving your mind. If you move your mind, one will be light, the other will be darkness. How should you choose? Therefore, you don't need to choose. You just need to listen to Haotian's choice." Long Qing said, "But I am not the great divine priest of revelation. I can't feel Haotian's edict. How can I know what is Haotian's choice? How can I know that I have not made a wrong judgment? The Taoist in indigo said, whatever you think is what you think. Long Qing was very confused and said, isn't that following one's heart? The Taoist in indigo suddenly laughed and said indifferently, everything in the world is destined by Haotian. Everything is under the control of Haotian, including people's hearts. In this case, how can you really follow your heart without any rules? You follow your heart. In fact, you are following Haotian. Hearing this, Long Qing felt as if the wind and snow on the wilderness were sprinkled on his head. Suddenly, the fierceness of the scorching sun was washed away. He became extremely refreshed and instantly understood many things. He bowed forward and pressed his forehead against the hot deck. His slightly trembling voice was full of desire and courage. He said loudly, I want to become stronger. The Taoist in indigo said, the day before yesterday, I threw you into the fire spring. With the endless warmth and mercy given by Haotian, I rebuilt the snow mountain and ocean of qi in your body. Now you can already cultivate. If you want to become stronger as soon as possible, then after you come ashore, go to the West Hill and enter that shabby abbey. Now that Long Qing knew the incomparably noble identity of the Taoist in indigo, he could naturally guess that the shabby abbey he mentioned was the legendary Jishou Abbey. He could not help but be ecstatic and kowtow repeatedly. The Taoist in indigo said, there are still 6 volumes of tomes of arcane in the abbey. When you have read them all, you may be considered powerful. However, reading is a very painful thing after all. Yi Su had to stab himself with a sword to move his eyes away from the pages. With your will, you definitely can't resist the temptation of the tomes of arcane. At that time, your Taoist heart will be broken and reborn, and the pain will be indescribable. Long Qing said with a determined expression, I am not afraid of pain or bitterness. The Taoist in indigo said again, there are thousands of disciples in Haotian Taoism, but there are only a few who have the opportunity to enter the Jishou Abbey. You are not the great divine priest of the divine hall, nor are you a disciple of the previous generation who has made great contributions to Haotian Taoism. Then, you can only be a servant in the abbey. Will you dislike such an identity? If the cultivators in the world knew that they had the opportunity to enter the Jishou Abbey to read the 7 volumes of tomes of arcane, they would be willing to go to the Jishou Abbey every day, let alone be a servant. Even the manure pond would be fragrant. Long Qing naturally had the same thoughts. He said without hesitation, I am willing to do anything for Haotian Taoism. The Taoist in indigo said, I can feel your heart at this time, but there are some grumpy old people living in the abbey. Even I don't want to care about them. Don't be afraid when the time comes. Long Qing was shocked speechless. He thought to himself, what kind of person is the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey? Is there anyone else in the world besides the headmaster of the academy who can make him feel troubled? In the night, there were occasional sounds of insects in the Jishou Abbey. Long Qing's face became paler and paler. Bean-sized beads of sweat rolled down from his forehead. His eyes became more and more dazed, and he looked extremely weak. One could imagine what kind of pain he was suffering now. Every time he opened the Sha hand scroll, he would suffer endless pain. Tonight, when he began to cultivate the gray eye, the pain became even more terrible. There seemed to be countless invisible swords on the seemingly ordinary pages, constantly stabbing his Taoist heart, trying to pierce it into a beehive. When he finished reading the last word of the gray eye technique, his Tao heart was also broken into countless pieces, and the fear and the pain of being cut by 1,000 knives directly made him faint. After a long time, Long Qing woke up. During this time, the morning light had just appeared outside the window. He looked at himself in horror and found that there were no wounds on his body. His Taoist heart was still as stable as yesterday, as if the thousands of invisible swords that appeared in the tomes of arcane last night were fake. He walked out of the thatched hut in a daze and washed his face by the lake. He became slightly more awake and went to his own house to wash up. Then, he started to fetch water to start a fire to cook. After he finished serving the 3 martial uncles who were serving the Tian Shu and finished their breakfast, he carried 2 buckets of clean water and a few boxes of things and walked towards the back of the monastery. This spring, Long Qing did chores day after day in the Jishou Abbey. He cleaned the courtyard, cooked, wiped the table, and ground the ink. Only late at night did he have the opportunity to read and cultivate. The days were very hard, but his mood was very peaceful. He did not have a trace of complaint. He just did it in silence and tried to read as much as possible. It was interesting to say that his biggest enemy in the world, Ning Ke, had basically lived such a hard and fulfilling life in the past 10 years, especially after entering the academy. He did not know if this was in accordance with the words of the youngest uncle of the academy. If fate wanted to choose someone, then there would be a lot of things that needed to be done. Long Qing carried a shoulder pole and carried a suitcase. He walked out of the Taoist temple and came to the front of a cliff. During these days in the Jishou Abbey, he did not have any complaints. Even if it was unbearable pain, he was willing to endure it. However, looking at the cliff, his eyes were full of fear and an expression of wanting to escape. Under the cliff was a dense green forest, and the cliff was covered with green vines that were as thick as a finger. In the gaps of the green vines, one could faintly see that the cliff was grayish-yellow in color. One could also see that there were many caves on the cliff. The depths of the caves were unknown and revealed a sense of mystery. This cliff full of caves was very high and gave people a very majestic feeling. Standing at the foot of the mountain, Long Qing was like a small ant. If someone looked down at the earth from a very high sky, he would probably think that this cliff was just an inconspicuous mound or an ant nest covered with moss. There are some things that I have to report to everyone. Today is a rest day on Saturday. This chapter is to make up for the day I took leave on the 28th of next month. Previously, I said that from the 22nd onwards, would write 2 chapters a day until the end of the month. Some readers thought that I did not keep my promise and were very angry. They specifically told me that they would read pirated versions in the future. I did not write 2 chapters for some days, but there was one day when I wrote 12,000 and another day when I wrote 10,000. So I did some calculations. Excluding the rest day on the 25th, there are a total of 9 days from the 22nd to the end of the month. Including today's post, I wrote a total of 55,368 words, excluding nonsense and single chapters. My daily average is 6,152, which is exactly 2 chapters. It is actually very detailed because everyone has been very understanding of me. I am very grateful to everyone. However, since they said that it was because I did not fulfill my promise or because I have a problem with my character, I am a little speechless. Of course, if you insist that I should also write 2 chapters on the 25th, then I really have no way to explain it. I will continue to improve my work attitude and try to reduce the terrible typos and mistakes in the first period of time. This is really difficult. There is something wrong with my brain. I will not make any blind promises and let everyone down. I will try to ensure that the updates are continuous and contribute to everyone's leisure and entertainment instead of making things difficult for everyone. Thank you again, and I appeal for genuine subscriptions. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 495. The lush foliage of the forest at the foot of the cliff blocked the sunlight. It was exceptionally quiet and even a little scary. Fortunately, it did not take long for Long Qing to walk out of the forest. He shifted the pole on his shoulder to avoid pressing on the wounds he had suffered a few days ago. Looking at the green cliff in front of him and the vines that covered the entire rock wall, he took a deep breath and dispelled the fear in his heart. Then, he lowered his head and walked up the narrow and steep mountain path. The cliff was very steep. It was very difficult to climb with such a heavy thing. When Long Qing walked to the front of a cave, he already felt that his back was so sore that it was about to break. Fortunately, there was a small stone platform about 3 or 4 steps wide at the entrance of the cave. He put down the bucket clumsily. He remembered that there was a spring in the cave, so he did not take any water. He took out a box from his bag, pulled the dense vines with his hands, and walked into the cave. The cave was very low. Ordinary people could not even stand straight in the cave. Long Qing walked forward silently with his back bent, looking like a real servant. However, although the cave was low and the entrance was covered by vines, it was not dark at all. Instead, it was as bright as day. That was because the walls of the cave were inlaid with glowing luminous pearls every few steps. These luminous pearls were round, flawless, and as big as chicken eggs. If they were placed in the world, they would be the most precious treasures. However, there were countless caves in the Green Mountain behind the Jishou Abbey, and there were countless of these precious luminous pearls in this cave. Moreover, the builders used these treasures as candles. Long Qing had been to this cave before, so he could remain calm. After all, the first time he entered this cave, he was completely shocked by the scene in front of him and could not speak. After all, even in the imperial palace of capital Qing of the Yan Kingdom where he had lived since he was a child, there were only a few luminous pearls of this quality. The cave between the Green Mountain cliffs seemed simple and even miserable, but it was a different world inside. The stone walls were carved with flowers and inlaid with jade, pastel flowers, and birds. The path was paved with gold bricks, and the walls were tied with silver ribbons. When he walked into the deepest cave hall, there were countless rare flowers and old paintings. It was extremely rich and complicated, even exceeding the enjoyment of emperors in the world and the limits of human imagination. It seemed vulgar, but no one dared to say it was vulgar. Because other than Haotian Taoism, which ruled the whole world and had endless wealth and resources, no other power could do such a vulgar thing in the deep forest that no one knew about. There was a very large soft couch in the hall, and dozens of snowfield direwolf's fur were spread on the couch, making it look like a real snowfield. In the middle of the sea of silver-white fur sat an old man with a withered face. The wrinkles on his face were very deep, and the Taoist robe he was wearing was very old, as if it had not been changed for many years. Snowfield direwolves were very strong, and it was extremely difficult to kill one. There were so many snowfield direwolves' fur here, and it was really hard to know how strong this old Taoist was in the past. Long Qing walked to the bed, knelt down and presented the box with both hands. He did not dare to look up at the old Taoist, and looked very respectful and humble, silently waiting for the old Taoist's order. Lying drunk on the skin of a snow wolf and appreciating the most precious objects in the world was a luxury that countless people in the world dreamed of. However, there was no expression on the old Taoist's skinny face. He seemed lifeless, and it could even be said that he looked like a dried corpse. The only thing that could prove that he was still alive was the occasional movement of his eyes. His eyes were filled with cruelty, and there was also endless blood-red and madness. Sitting in isolation for dozens of years, even a real palace would become the most gloomy prison, let alone a cave. The horror in the old Taoist's eyes probably came from this. The reason why this old Taoist would sit in the cave for decades was naturally not because he was imprisoned. There were not many people in this world who could imprison him, and Taoism would not treat such a great figure of the previous generation like this. Other than some very obscure reasons, the most important reason was that he could not walk due to his disability. Or rather, even if he could walk due to his disability, he was not willing to appear in the world as a disabled person. The old Taoist's disability was very serious. He had no feet, no legs, and even no buttocks, as if a sharp sword had once cut him in half from the waist. So now he was only left with half of his body, sitting on the snow-white snowfield direwolf's fur, as if he was trapped in it. Being cut in half at the waist was one of the cruelest death sentences in the world. Since it was called a death sentence, it was naturally to be cut in half at the waist. Many important organs would be lost, and the blood in the body would be drained. Inevitably, one would die miserably. But this old Taoist who was cut in half at the waist survived, and he lived for many years. Of course, he lived a very painful life, and he just lived. When Long Qing entered the cave for the first time and saw the old Taoist who only had half of his body left, he was extremely shocked. he could not figure out how the old Taoist had survived. Later, he knew that the old Taoist had only drunk the spring water in the cave for dozens of years, and did not eat any food. In this way, he completely abandoned the lower half of his body. Of course, the human body would still produce some waste. He thought that the old Taoist must have used his terrifying cultivation to forcibly evaporate these waste from the surface of the skin along with the body fluid. This speculation shocked him even more. Human beings needed to eat grains to survive. This was the rule set by Haotian, and it could not be violated. Even if the grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state could not eat for dozens of years. According to the records of the West Hill, only the legendary sages who had surpassed the 5 states could be purified by Tianqi and become divine bodies. In this way, they could collect the qi of heaven and earth and live by drinking dew. In this case, could it be that the withered Taoist who had been cut in half at the waist was so terrifying that he had already crossed the threshold of the 5 states of cultivation decades ago? Long Qing could not prove his speculation, but if it was correct, then the withered Taoist on the soft couch in the snow sea would be the first sage he had met in the world. Of course, he did not know how high the cultivation state of the Abbey Dean on the boat in the South Sea was. Therefore, after entering the cave, he knelt in front of the soft couch, looking extremely humble. He could not hide the awe and even fear in his heart for the old Taoist. Then, these emotions all turned into some kind of desire, the desire for the unknown end of the cultivation road, the desire for power. He thought he finally understood why the Abbey Dean sent him to the Jishou Abbey to be a servant. Only as a servant could he come to the Green Mountain Cave and meet a person like the old Taoist who stood at the top of the cultivation world. However, the development of things did not completely conform to Long Qing's beautiful imagination. The old Taoist, who looked like a mummy, looked expressionlessly at him who knelt in front of the couch. His lips moved slowly, and his hoarse voice sounded like 2 hot stones rubbing against each other in the desert at noon. It was extremely unpleasant to hear. "You are too weak." Long Qing did not hear the words clearly. He raised his head subconsciously, but met the eyes of the old Taoist on the couch, which were filled with madness and violence. When he met the old Taoist's gaze, he only felt that his consciousness was suddenly pulled into a terrifying sea of blood, and he groaned in pain. "You are too weak. You are a good-for-nothing." The old Taoist spread out his trembling hands and tightly clutched his skinny throat, as if he wanted to struggle to death. His voice was forced out from between his fingers, full of disappointment and even despair. "You are a good-for-nothing. What qualifications do you have to enter the Jishou Abbey? What qualifications do you have to talk to me? You are just nonsense. I am also a good-for-nothing. The people hiding in this mountain are all a bunch of F***king good-for-nothings." The old Taoist moved angrily among the snow-white fur. With only half of his body left, he looked particularly funny and tragic when he moved, like a worm wriggling. His shrill cry echoed in the cave, and an indescribably terrifying aura instantly filled the entire space, oppressing everything that could be touched. The green vines suddenly became chaotic, and Long Qing flew out of the cave with blood spurting from his mouth. He fell heavily on the edge of the stone platform and almost fell down. He looked at the dark cave entrance and thought of the terrifying aura that he had felt earlier. His eyes were filled with shock and fear. He knew that the old Taoist did not want to kill him, but his aura had naturally leaked out due to his anger. However, even so, it already had such a strong power. If the old Taoist really used his full cultivation, no one in the world would be able to resist him. Long Qing panted for a moment, and gradually calmed down. He wiped the blood from his lips, put the carrying pole on his shoulder, carried his bag, and continued to walk up the cliff. There were many caves in this green mountain, and many seniors of Haotian Taoism lived in them. These seniors of Haotian Taoism were in different states, but they were all extremely powerful figures. However, like the old Taoist, they had suffered extremely serious injuries and were disabled, so they all had bad tempers. Who was it that could seriously injure so many seniors of Haotian Taoism? After all, some of these seniors of Haotian Taoism had surpassed the 5 states decades ago. Didn't that mean that the person who injured them had a higher cultivation state, and it was not just 1 or 2 levels higher? Long Qing could vaguely see the answer to this question, but he did not want to continue thinking about it, because the tomes of arcane in the temple and the green mountain behind the temple were all his hopes. He silently walked between the cliffs of the green mountain, going in and out of those mysterious caves. He was like a busy worker walking in an ant's nest, and had no time to care about what spring looked like. Chang'an City. Ning Ke and Sang Sang had dinner in the Grand Secretary's mansion. After dinner, Mrs. Zheng and Sang Sang went to talk, while Grand Secretary Xing Jing talked with Ning Ke in the study for a long time. It was a little late when they left the mansion. Seeing that there were few people on the street, Ning Ke decided to spend the night at the old brush pen shop with Sang Sang. The old brush pen shop was as usual. The bedroom in the backyard was fully prepared. Sang Sang boiled water, and after they washed up, they went to bed and prepared to sleep. It was in the thick of spring, and the night wind was not cold. In fact, there was a hint of dryness. A wild cat was lying on the wall of the courtyard, looking at the stars in the night sky. It let out a shrill cry that sounded like a baby's cry. The sound was a little unpleasant, and Ning Ke could not sleep at all. He opened his eyes and looked at the beam above his head. He suddenly said, "Do you know? Yi Hongyu killed the great divine priest of judgment." Sang Sang said softly, "I don't know." Ning Ke found that she was not as shocked as he was when he heard the news. He could not help but laugh at himself, thinking that Sang Sang was indeed not a mortal like him. He said, "I heard that after killing the great divine priest, she immediately injured Luo Kadi. If it were not for the hierarch's order, she would have killed that person." Sang Sang softly agreed. Ning Ke said, "I thought I had already caught up with her. Who would have thought that she would leave me so far behind? She is now the great divine priest of West Hill. If we fight in the future, I can't beat her, and I can't use your identity as the great divine priest of light to suppress her. What should I do?" Sang Sang said, "Then don't fight." Ning Ke suddenly said after a moment of silence, "Your father said that if I let you follow me to Lang Temple, it would be a long journey, and it would be wrong to use the identity of a handmaiden. He wants us to get engaged first. What do you think we should do?" Sang Sang asked in a low voice. "What do you think we should do?" Ning Ke said, "Then get engaged." Sang Sang's voice sounded from under the thin quilt. It was a little humming, as if she had a cold. "Okay." Ning Ke said, "Come to sleep, I'm a little hot." Sang Sang moved over from the other side of the bed and got into his arms. Every year when it was hot in late spring, Ning Ke liked to sleep with her in his arms. Because she was born with a cold body, holding her was like holding a cold jade, a soft cold jade. Tonight was the same. Sang Sang's body was still so cold. But she felt very hot herself. Ning Ke also felt a little hot. Listening to the mournful cries of the wild cats on the wall, he became more and more annoyed. He scolded in a low voice, "Spring is almost over, why are you still crying? I wish everyone a pleasant work tomorrow." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 496. Not long ago, in the study of the Grand Secretary's mansion, Ning Ke and Xing Jing had a conversation like this. At that time, Xing Jing drank half a cup of tea and kept silent for another 5 minutes. Then he suddenly said, "I heard from Sang Sang that you are going to leave in a few days." Ning Ke nodded and said, "The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is in autumn and the Lank Temple is a little far. If you want to go, you have to leave soon, or you will miss the time." Last spring, the Lank Temple had sent the invitation to the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival to Chang'an City. Monk Guanhai had personally handed it to Ning Quebec. However, Ning Ke did not plan to go because of some considerations. However, his idea was not approved by the academy. Xing Jing said, "It is a long journey, so we should go together. But Sang Sang is my daughter and the successor of the great divine priest of light in West Hill. She can't follow you as a handmaiden like she did in the past. Have you thought about this? Ning Ke had not thought about this problem. He said, then what do you mean? Xing Jing looked into his eyes and asked, how old is Sang Sang this year? Ning Ke counted the days and said, 16. Xing Jing said firmly, since she is 16, what are you waiting for? Hurry up and get married. It will be more convenient for us to get along on the journey as husband and wife, and the Grand Secretary's mansion will not be laughed at. Ning Ke said helplessly, are you in a hurry? We only have a few days to prepare. Xing Jing looked into his eyes and said, you two have been together for 16 years. How can you be in a hurry? But marriage cannot be neglected. How about you get engaged first? It was a simple conversation, but Ning Ke could not resist in front of a father who cared about his daughter. He agreed in a daze. Under the starlight outside the window, Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang in his arms. He saw her gradually relaxed brows and saw the smile on her dark face. He could not help but smile as well. They would get married one day. Why should he be afraid of getting engaged? But when he dug out the dying baby from the pile of corpses 16 years ago, he did not expect that she would one day become a girl and become his wife. Thinking of these trivial things, Ning Ke gradually fell asleep. For ordinary people, falling asleep was the consent of falling asleep. But this was not applicable to Ning Quebec. Because he had lived on the edge of life and death since he was a child, energy and time were very precious. Therefore, he had always fallen asleep very quickly and deeply. It did not take long for him to feel refreshed. This situation continued until he began to cultivate. That year, he brought Sang Sang to the market and bought a record of the highest enlightenment. After returning to the small courtyard in the city of Wei, he began to cultivate according to the method written in the book and tried to meditate. It was also that night that he had a very warm dream. He dreamed of an ocean. After that, he began to dream one after another. They were usually warm dreams after meditation, but those dreams did not have any specific content, nor were there any vivid scenes. Until the spring 3 years ago, when he left the city of Wei with Princess Liu for Chang'an. During the journey, he had a conversation with Liu Qingchen and had a strange dream while hugging Sang Sang's little foot in the middle of the night. In that dream, he stood on the cold and dark wilderness. He saw the cavalry of the Tang Empire, the warriors of the Yueluan Kingdom, the crossbowmen of the South Jin Kingdom, the barbarians on the grassland, the countless corpses that dyed the wilderness red, and the 3 black clouds of dust in front of the wilderness. He saw the sky gradually occupied by darkness. People looked in the direction of darkness with fear, and a tall man beside him said that it was going to be dark. After killing the tea master Yen Suqing, Ning Ke fled on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The blood on his body and the big black umbrella alarmed the divine talisman. In that early morning, his blocked snow mountain was rebuilt, and he finally set foot on the road of cultivation. It was also at that time that he had another dream. In that dream, he returned to the cold and dark wilderness. The night was still invading the sky, so he looked up at the sky, while countless people around him did not look up at the sky, but just looked at him coldly, vigilantly and sadly. At this time, a sudden thunder sounded in the sky, and a light door slowly opened. Light came to the world again, and a huge golden dragon indifferently stretched out its head, looking down at the people on the ground. In the exam to enter the second floor of the academy, Ning Ke once again entered the dream where reality and illusion could not be distinguished when he climbed the rock on the peak. The night was still invading the wilderness, and the light was hidden behind the clouds, becoming brighter and brighter. People in the wilderness were still looking at him, including the housekeeper and the young master whom he had killed many years ago. The tall man asked him what choice he would make, and he said he did not want to choose. The tall man asked him what if he had to choose. At the end of the dream, Ning Ke killed the housekeeper and the young master again, and then walked into the night with the knife on his back. Ning Ke looked at the 3 black smoke and felt the coldness coming from them, and his body became very stiff. He knew that he was dreaming, but he did not know how to wake up from the dream. The night was getting colder, and the light was getting brighter and brighter, dividing the whole sky into two halves. The huge dragon head looked down at the people on the ground mercilessly, and slowly opened its mouth. The soldiers in the wilderness were still fighting with each other, but it was hard to tell who was fighting with whom. Countless corpses were soaked in blood. He looked at the tall man beside him, and looked at the white hair on his shoulders. His heart beat faster and faster, as if the broken war drums in the wilderness could explode at any time. Because this time he finally confirmed that the tall man in the wilderness in the dream was the headmaster of the academy. The headmaster of the academy did not turn around, but looked at the sky quietly, watching the battle between the light and the darkness. However, Ning Ke was very clear that the headmaster of the academy was waiting for him to make a choice. He did not want to make a choice. To be more precise, he was able to make a choice last time because he was ignorant. Now he vaguely understood something, so he was not as fearless as before. What confused him the most was why the headmaster of the academy wanted him to make a choice. Ning Ke wanted to escape this dream, this blood-stained wilderness, so he turned and ran towards the periphery of the wilderness. He ran faster and faster, and his heart beat faster and faster. His breathing became more and more rapid, and his face became paler and paler. Then he ran into a white sea, a sea full of white lotus flowers. The sea was no longer warm, and it was very cold. The white lotus petals were frozen into ice sculptures, and then scattered into pieces of jade, sinking into the sea. His body sank to the bottom of the sea, and entered the layer of blood that was thick like blood. The blood made it difficult for him to breathe. No, he could not breathe. He began to struggle with all his might, trying to escape, but he found that his hands and feet could no longer move, and struggling would only make him sink deeper. Ning Ke opened his eyes and woke up. He was panting heavily, and his body was covered in cold sweat. His eyes were full of fear, and he looked like a dead man. He looked at the paper pasted on the roof, and after a long time, he finally confirmed that he had left the dream and returned to the old brush pen shop. These dreams were his biggest secret. He did not tell Chin Pippi, the headmaster of academy, or other senior brothers and sisters. Although these dreams were full of the truth that he wanted to find out, he did not dare to tell anyone, because he always felt that these dreams were hiding something terrible. 16 years ago, the West Hill Divine Palace, and now the Buddhism sect were all guessing whether he was the son of Yama. Ning Ke used to think that these were complete nonsense. However, every time he thought of what Wei Guangming said when he returned to Cheng and from the wilderness, he felt extremely terrified. If the legendary son of Yama referred to a time traveler from another world, then wouldn't it be him? The dark night came, and the underworld invasion. Although it was only a legend, it was a legend that made cultivators in the world vigilant and uneasy for thousands of years. He did not know the specific details, but he knew that this must be a major event that involved the destruction of the world. If he was really the son of Yama, then what would he face? No matter how tolerant the headmaster of academy was, and how he did not even care about youngest uncle and him joining the devil, he would definitely not ignore this matter. Otherwise, why would there be a tall figure in his dream? No matter how peaceful and warm the back of the mountain of the academy was, it would not be soft-hearted in the face of such a big problem. If he was the son of Yama, eldest brother did not know what he would do, but second brother would definitely take off the ancient crown and beat him to death, and then jump off the cliff to show their friendship. If he fell into the hands of the West Hill Divine Palace, he would definitely be tied to the stake and burned to ashes. If he fell into the hands of the Buddhism sect, would the monks shave his head and let him recite sutras in the Xiankong temple for the rest of his life? In this case, the best ending was to become a monk. Ning Ke leaned against the headboard and thought about these things. His clothes, which were soaked in cold sweat, became dry and wet again, and his face became paler and paler. He could not imagine what he would face in the world if he was really the son of Yama. At that time, the whole world would probably abandon him, and he would be the only one left to wander in the world, living a miserable life and avoiding the divine light of Haotian like a mouse. At this moment, Sang Sang moved in his arms and frowned slightly, as if she had dreamed of something bad, or felt Ning Kei's mood at this time. Ning Kei looked at her slightly dark face and gradually calmed down. Because no matter whether he became a traitor or said that he was the son of Yama, there would always be a little handmaiden who would not leave him. Even if he wandered in the world again, he would not wander alone in the world, but two people. This was good. He lowered his head and kissed between her eyebrows, trying to kiss away the frown there. However, Sang Sang seemed to feel uncomfortable, and her eyebrows were knitted tighter and tighter. Ning Kei suddenly felt that something was wrong. Sang Sang's face became paler and paler, and it was as frightening as snow. Her tightly knitted eyebrows seemed to be in great pain, and her body became colder and colder. Ning Kei was shocked and hurriedly shook her to wake her up. Sang Sang opened her eyes with difficulty and looked extremely weak. A bone-piercing chill came from her clothes, and Ning Kei could not help but shiver. Sang Sang trembled in pain and clutched Ning Kei's clothes tightly. She wanted to say something, but could not say anything. Ning Kei did not dare to delay. He got up and blew a loud whistle. He pulled a thick quilt to wrap her body, held her in his arms, and rushed out. He kicked open the wooden door of the old brush pen shop and ran to Lin 47th Street. It was not dawn, and it was the darkest. Ning Kei looked at the entrance of the alley and shouted angrily, "You pig! Why are you so slow?" The big black horse was suddenly awakened by the whistle. It was about to express its dissatisfaction when it saw Ning Kei's livid face and immediately knew that something serious had happened. Ning Kei was in a very bad mood at this time, and he might really kill it at any time. It hurriedly kicked its four hooves and dragged the heavy carriage to the old brush pen shop. Ning Kei jumped on the carriage and said while gasping, "To the academy. I have good news for everyone. The main plot of the third volume is basically finished, and I will go through it again tonight. P.S. There are so many typos that I want to kill myself. I am really in a bad state, so I have to revise it. 201209050023, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 497. The black horse carriage flew through the eastern city and forced open the Vermilion Bird City gate with 2 waste tokens. It ran along the straight official road to the academy in the south. Inside the carriage, Ning Kei held Sang Sang tightly, his right hand fumbling in the carriage wall, and kept gasping. He was in good health, and his breath became longer after cultivating the Great Spirit. He gasped not because of fatigue or hard work, but because he could feel Sang Sang's body getting colder and colder through the thick quilt. Finally, he found the small wine pot he had prepared before. Without any hesitation, he unscrewed the lid with his trembling fingers and handed it to Sang Sang's lips. A strong smell of wine filled the carriage. Sang Sang closed her eyes tightly, and her sparse eyelashes trembled slightly. Her face was pale, and her slightly gray lips were tightly pressed together. She clenched her teeth so hard that the liquor Ning Kei poured from the flagon could not enter her mouth at all. It dripped down from the corner of her lips and wet the bedding. Ning Kei looked at the dripping liquor and her weak face, and his body and mind were occupied by fear. He was so scared that he lowered his head in pain and held her tighter. Sang Sang had not fallen ill for a long time. To be more precise, she had not fallen ill since she left the city of Wei and came to Chang'an. But today, she was so sick that it was more terrible than any illness in Ning Kei's memory. So he was very scared and made a decision immediately. He did not carry her to the clinic, but boarded the horse carriage and rushed to the academy in the south of the city. There were no doctors in the academy, but there were teachers and senior brothers in the academy. Ning Kei believed that as long as Sang Sang was still breathing, she would be fine. It turned out that Ning Kei's judgment was correct. He ran into the clouds with Sang Sang in his arms and came to the cliff plateau at the back of the mountain of the academy. He shouted towards the lake. His senior brothers and sisters who were still asleep suddenly woke up and came out to greet him. Seventh sister was at the front. She was embroidering a picture of a butterfly cat before going to bed and didn't go to sleep until late at night. There was still an embroidery needle in her hair bun, and her face was still full of tiredness and annoyance for being woken up. When she saw Ning Kei's terrified expression and Sang Sang in his arms, she immediately understood what had happened. The tiredness and anger on her face turned into seriousness. She didn't ask Ning Kei anything. She just looked at Sang Sang's pale face, took out the embroidery needle from her hair bun, and stabbed Sang Sang's neck 4 times as fast as lightning. The needle fell into the wind. Sang Sang grunted softly, still frowning and not waking up. However, the pale color on her face faded a little, and the original light black color reappeared. Senior sister. How is it? Ning Kei looked at seventh sister and asked in a trembling voice. He didn't know that senior sister could also use acupuncture to treat people in addition to tactical arrays and embroidery. But looking at Sang Sang's change, he suddenly had a lot of hope. The chill is attacking the heart. It's a little dangerous. I can only use needles to suppress it for now, said the seventh senior sister. Ning Kei's arrival had awakened everyone by the lake at the back of the mountain of the academy. Eldest brother also appeared in the distance, but his movements were still so slow, as if nothing could make him feel anxious or anxious. The seventh senior sister looked at eldest brother and seemed to think of something. She became a lot more relaxed and shouted, "Senior brother, drag 11th brother from the mountain, but hurry up." Eldest brother was startled and turned back to the forest behind him. The seventh senior sister looked at Ning Kei's anxious expression and comforted him. "It's not a big problem. You take Sang Sang to the straw hut first. Teacher is there, and nothing will happen. Just wait for 11th brother." Ning Kei didn't understand the meaning of the senior sister's words. If teacher was willing to help, Sang Sang would naturally be fine. But why did she have to wait for 11th brother? The morning light gradually shrouded the back of the mountain of the academy. It fell on the golden and jade-like grass on the eaves of the straw hut, and then reflected to the forest further away. The meadow surrounded by flowers and trees was bright. Ning Kei, Chen Pippi and others stood outside the straw hut, waiting for the news inside. Since last spring, Sang Sang often went to the back of the mountain of the academy. With her good cooking and quiet temperament, she won everyone's love and pity. At this time, knowing that she was seriously ill, the disciples of the academy couldn't help but be very worried. Tang Xiaotang was so anxious that her eyes even turned red. However, Ning Kei was much calmer than before. Because teacher had already woken up and was in the straw hut at this time. He believed that even if Sang Sang had one foot in the underworld, teacher would be able to pull her back. At this moment, Wang Qi walked out of the hut. Ning Kei hurried forward. Wang Qi looked at him and said, "She was born with a weak body and has been suffering from coldness for many years. Every time this disease breaks out, it gets more serious. The longer it stays hidden and suppressed, the more serious the disease will be. I checked her pulse and confirmed that she suffered from a severe cold some time ago. Recently, she has been overthinking. That's why she is like this now." Ning Kei asked, "Will she be okay?" Wang Qi said, "Seventh sister pressed her pulse with golden needles in time. I decocted a medicine for her, and it should be able to slightly reduce the cold. It's not a big deal. Just pay attention to keep warm in the future, and don't dare to catch a cold." Hearing this, Ning Kei suddenly relaxed, and suddenly felt that his legs were a little weak. Wang Qi suddenly thought of something and looked at him confusedly and asked, "Youngest brother, Sang Sang's disease came from her mother's womb, and it must have broken out many times in the past years. There are no good doctors in the city of Wei, and only a group of quacks in Chang'an. How did you manage to keep her alive until now?" When Sang Sang was young, Ning Kei often took her to see a doctor. The money that he had painstakingly saved was basically spent on the medicine shop, but it was of no use. Later, he found a way to help Sang Sang survive until today. Hearing his senior brother's question, he did not dare to hide anything and answered honestly. Later, every time Sang Sang got sick, I would make her drink a big bag of liquor. Second brother had been standing silently outside the hut without any expression on his face. At this time, when he heard that Ning Ke had been treating Sang Sang with liquor all these years, he suddenly frowned and looked extremely unhappy. Wang Qi thought for a moment and nodded. This is indeed a good way. Although the pulse warming with liquor can only temporarily treat the symptoms, it is much cleaner than those rotten medicines. Fortunately, there was such an evaluation, or second brother would never spare Ning Quebec watching Wang Qi's figure disappear in the flowers. Ning Ke only today knew that 11th brother, who loved to talk about the flower addict, turned out to be a divine doctor. Thinking of the flower addict with a head full of petals when he first entered the back mountain, Ning Ke could not help but feel a little worried and asked, "Is 11th brother reliable?" 7th sister said, 11th brother has spent his whole life on flowers and plants. How can he be compared to Lu Chenjia, the flower addict, who only loves the appearance but doesn't know the soul? He can recognize all the flowers and plants in the world, and he is proficient in all kinds of herbal medicine. He is the most reliable doctor. Hearing this, Ning Ke finally felt relieved, but not completely. In his opinion, the most reliable person in the world was of course his teacher, and he had to listen to what his teacher had to say. The hut was open on all sides, and only a few screens were placed on the platform. There was a big couch inside, which was the residence of the headmaster of academy. At this time, Sang Sang was lying on it. Sang Sang had woken up for a while, but now she fell asleep again under the effect of the medicine. Tang Xiaotang put the medicine bowl aside and wet the towel with boiling water. She wrung it until it was half wet, and then carefully placed it on her still cold forehead. Then she held her little hand and whispered something. Looking at this scene through the screen, Ning Ke felt very grateful. Then he looked back at the headmaster of academy and asked worriedly, "Teacher, you see. Is she all right?" The headmaster of academy got up much earlier than usual today, so he was in a bad mood. However, he thought that Ning Ke's mood must be even worse, so he refrained from scolding him. He held a bowl of lotus seed porridge and blew on it, saying, "What can happen? She'll be fine as long as she basks in the sun." These words seemed very irresponsible, but Ning Ke was really relieved. Since the headmaster of academy said that she was fine, then Sang Sang must be fine. But, would basking in the sun help? He walked to the headmaster of academy, took the bowl of lotus seed porridge, and stirred it carefully with a spoon. He asked with unprecedented respect, "Teacher, Sang Sang's body. Didn't you say that she was fine last time?" The headmaster of academy said, "She was born with a weak and cold body, and has not received proper treatment for all these years. No one knows how much cold aura has accumulated in her internal organs and bone marrow. Fortunately, she had the lucky chance to become Wei Guangming's disciple, and was able to obtain Wei Guangming's divine light. Naturally, she can suppress the cold aura. As time passes, the divine light in her body will be able to turn the cold aura into nothingness. I told you that she was fine that day, so she is fine. Are you questioning me?" After confirming that the lotus seed porridge was cold, Ning Ke respectfully handed it over and said humbly, "Teacher, your words are a slap in my face. I just don't understand what is going on." The headmaster of academy looked at him and said sarcastically, "You have to ask yourself what is going on. She was originally a sickly little girl, but she was brought by your heartless master to fight with Xiaoho. Is Xiaoho so easy to kill? In order to help you, she shone brightly on the cliff that night and used up all the divine light in an instant. The cold aura in her body had been suppressed for many days, and suddenly regained its freedom. Naturally, she would find an opportunity to rebel. I don't know how you bullied her recently, making her lose her composure, which is rarely seen. That's why she is in danger today." Ning Ke was silent, thinking that it was all his fault. But Sang Sang was quiet and even a little dull. Something that could make her lose her composure. Could it be an engagement? "Teacher, since she is born with a weak and cold body, how can we get rid of the root cause?" The headmaster of academy took a sip of the lotus seed porridge and nodded with satisfaction. He said, as I said before, it is very simple to cure her. Bask in the sun and practice the divine skill. When you master the divine skill, the little girl will recover naturally. Ning Ke thought of the long journey and asked tentatively, it is a long way to the Lank temple. She is weak now, can I not go? The headmaster of academy was furious and scolded, which family are you from? Can't you walk without the little handmaiden service? Even if she needs to recuperate, you can go yourself. Besides, the Buddhism sect has its own set of skills. I admire the little monk's medical skills in the Lank temple. Are you going or not? Ning Ke said helplessly, I'll go. Teacher, why are you so angry? The conversation between the headmaster of academy and Ning Ke had already made the disciples in the hut want to laugh. When they heard Ning Ke's last sentence, they finally could not help but laugh out loud. Eldest brother did not laugh. He looked at Sang Sang on the couch, his face full of worry and pity. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 498. There was a dormitory at the back of the academy's mountain. Sang Sang was seriously ill, so he naturally stayed. It didn't take long for Sang Sang to wake up. Although she was still weak, at least she was not as scary as last night. Ning Ke told jokes and hummed a tune like when they were young to coax her to rest. Seeing that he was really tired, Tang Xiaotang began to take care of him and asked him to rest outside. It was almost dusk, and the warm sunset shrouded the back of the mountain. Ning Ke walked out of the courtyard and saw Chen Pippi standing by the lake, pretending to be lonely. He was startled and asked, "What's wrong?" Chen Pippi looked at the water grass and the tens of thousands of gold coins on the surface of the lake. His round and cute face was full of loneliness. He said, "I'm a little touched to see you and Sang Sang so close." Ning Ke's heart skipped a beat. He wondered if he and Tang Xiaotang were quarreling again. He patted his shoulder and comforted him, "Senior brother, you don't have to compare this with me." Chen Pippi explained seriously, "Tang Tang and I are not like what you think." Ning Ke thought that Tang Tang could even call him such a nauseating title. What else was there to explain? He couldn't help mocking, "Don't you think it's the most disgusting thing in the world for a man to deny it?" Chen Pippi turned to look at him and said sincerely, "We are just holding hands." Ning Ke said sarcastically, "She is just a little girl. What do you want to do to her?" Chen Pippi said with slight annoyance, "She is about the same age as Sang Sang." Ning Ke was a little embarrassed and kept silent. The soil by the lake looked like golden Kila under the sunset. Chen Pippi lowered his head and gently turned his heels, leaving a few golden prints on the soles. After a long silence, he said, "Tang Tang and I are not like you and Sang Sang. We have not experienced life and death together, nor have we had time to help each other. But we are very close. I feel sorry for her when I see her jump into the waterfall, and I feel happy when I take her to Chang." And Ning Ke didn't want to be a relationship expert, so he asked directly, "What are you trying to say?" Chen Pippi looked up at him and said seriously, "Sang Sang is very sick today. You must be very scared, right?" Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "Yes, I can't imagine life without her." Chen Pippi said, "Me too. I can't imagine the days without Tang Tang by my side, so I've decided to go back to Jishou Abbey." Ning Ke did not know what to say. 2 years ago, when Chen Pippi denied that he was the illegitimate son of the West Hill hierarch, Ning Ke had vaguely guessed this guy's identity. However, he had only confirmed it today. According to the previous context, he wanted to return to the Jishou Abbey to lay his cards on the table about Tang Xiaotang. Chen Pippi said, "There is a saying among the people that an ugly daughter-in-law has to see her in-laws. My mother died a long time ago, but my father is still alive. Tang Tang is not ugly, but in my father's eyes, people from the devil's doctrine are definitely not good-looking. To solve this problem, I have to go back after all. Ning Ke frowned slightly and said, have you ever thought that you might not be able to come back after returning to the Jishou Abbey? What about Tang Xiaotang? Chen Pipi looked at him and said sincerely, younger brother, you are my best friend in Chang'an City. If I really can't come back, please help me take care of Tang Tang. Ning Ke refused without hesitation and said, senior brother, don't try to trap me with such words. After all, you have to take care of your little wife by yourself. Don't count on me. Hearing this, Chen Pipi was furious and scolded, how can you be a younger brother? Besides, as long as the headmaster says something, will I really not come back for the rest of my life? Ning Ke thought for a while and said, no matter what, you have to wait for me to come back from the Lang Temple. Then we can discuss it. In my opinion, let the headmaster preside over the wedding for you. There is no need to return to the Jishou Abbey. The headmaster of the academy looked very unreliable, but his words were still so reliable. In fact, 11th brother's medicine was really good. At night, Sung Sung's body temperature returned to normal and she was much more energetic. She leaned on the bed and whispered to Tang Xiaotang. Ning Ke sat by the desk and looked at the first exploration of the Great Spirit in the light of the oil lamp. He always felt a little flustered and could not help but glance at the bed. He looked at Tang Xiaotang's beautiful but childish face and thought of what Chen Pipi had said before. He could not help but feel a little sorry for her. The spring night breeze blew gently and the oil lamp swayed slightly, making his face look a little uncertain. He thought of the strange dream he had last night, Sung Sung's illness, and what the headmaster had said in the hut during the day. Suddenly, he felt a little moved. He asked Tang Xiaotang to take care of Sang Sang and walked out of the small courtyard. After leaving the Mirror Lake, he passed through the forest, bypassed the waterfall, and walked out of the narrow gorge. He came to the back of the mountain of the academy, between the precipices in front of the sea of clouds. It was already late at night and the surroundings were quiet. Only the roar of the waterfall between the precipices kept echoing. Accompanied by the sound of the waterfall, he walked up the steep stone path. It took him a long time to walk to the cliff cave that had imprisoned him for a whole spring. The roofed corridor built by senior brothers had withstood the wind and rain for a year and was no longer as new as before. The wisteria fruits in the corridor fluttered in the night wind like bells. Ning Ke walked over and saw the headmaster of the academy. The headmaster of the academy sat on the edge of the precipice. In his left hand was a delicate food box with a few pieces of beef. In his right hand was a yellow clay wine pot with clear old wine. He looked at Chang'an City in the distance under the night sky and looked at the lights of tens of thousands of families. No one knew what he was thinking. Ning Ke walked behind the headmaster of the academy and bowed to him. He remembered that night in late spring last year, also on the edge of the precipice, he once had a long conversation with his teacher. The headmaster of the academy knew that it was him behind him and seemed to know what he was thinking. He raised his hand and waved, gesturing for Ning Ke to sit beside him. Then he said, "You can tell me when you want to." Ning Ke wanted to ask the headmaster of the academy many questions. However, looking at the tall figure on the edge of the precipice, he naturally thought of the figure in his dream. So he hesitated for a long time and still did not speak. Living in the Tang Empire was a very happy thing. Living in Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Empire, was the happiest thing. His days in the academy had brought him a happiness that he had never experienced in his life. So he did not know what to say. He was afraid that once he revealed those things, he would lose these happiness. The headmaster of the academy picked up a piece of beef with bright tendons and put it into his mouth. He slowly chewed for a while with an intoxicated expression on his face. When the fragrance of the meat completely melted in his mouth, he praised, "There is wine and meat, a life without worries." After saying this, he picked up the small pot of wine and took a sip. Sitting beside the headmaster of the academy, Ning Ke picked up a piece of beef with his hand and threw it into his mouth. He frowned because he felt that the beef was too bland. However, he soon realized that he was wrong. This seemingly bland and tasteless piece of beef became more and more fragrant in his mouth as he chewed. After the tendons were cut by his teeth, they released a wonderful mixture of elasticity and velvety texture. The unique taste of the beef gradually moistened his mouth and tongue. Good. He was extremely shocked and said, "Teacher, this is good wine and meat." The headmaster of the academy took out a small round iron wine pot from the side of the food box and threw it to him. He said with a smile, "Don't try to ask for wine in other ways. This wine is ordinary, but the beef is extremely tasteless. There is a pot and a stove in the cliff building. I can braise the white water beef. The best thing is that Old Yellow can't climb here to top me." Ning Kai knew that the Old Yellow mentioned by the headmaster was the Old Yellow Bull. It was really embarrassing to eat its own kind in front of the bull. Suddenly, he found that the small round wine pot in his hand was a little familiar. He looked carefully and saw that the surface of the wine pot was engraved with flat lines. Wasn't it the small iron pot that he used to blow up Xiao? Don't look at me like that. I just think that this small iron pot is more suitable to hold wine. Of course, to prevent the iron from staining the wine, I painted something on the wall of the pot. The headmaster of the academy brought the yellow wine pot to his lips and took a sip. He said, "A knife can be used to kill people, but it can also be used to cut vegetables. It depends on your choice. A person's mouth can be used to eat meat and drink wine, but it can also be used to speak and ask questions. It all depends on your choice. But there is no right or wrong." How could Ning Kai not understand what the headmaster of the academy said? After a moment of silence, he said, "Teacher, I have been having a dream these years. The story in the dream seems to be developing step by step." The headmaster of the academy asked, "Why do you ask me?" Ning Kai said, "Because you are in the dream." The headmaster of the academy said with a smile, "I am not Sang Sang. Why do you have to dream about me?" Ning Kai said angrily, "Teacher, I am talking about these things very seriously. Can you stop joking?" The headmaster of the academy looked at him with a smile and said, "Then continue with your dream." Looking at the headmaster of the academy's eyes, which seemed to be able to see through everything in the world, Ning Kai felt a little nervous. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Teacher, you should know about those dreams. Last year, tonight at this cliff, when we talked about the underworld invasion, you once asked me which direction the underworld was in my dream." The headmaster of the academy looked at his youngest student quietly and said, "This question is still valid now." Ning Kai said, "The darkness I saw came from the north." The headmaster of the academy said with a smile, "In that case, it is consistent with what I have learned from my travels over the years." Ning Kai asked, "What is the underworld invasion and the darkness coming?" "Last year, you only talked about these stories and legends, but you did not mention the details." Details? When the whole world is shrouded in darkness, no one can see the details. When the whole civilization is lost, even if there are details, they will not be able to be passed down. The headmaster of the academy looked at the darkness above the cliff and the stars. He said, "It is said that night and day alternated in this world. Sometimes it was light for tens of thousands of years, and sometimes it was darkness for tens of thousands of years. The war between light and darkness ran through the whole history. When Haotian won, it was the world of light today. When Yama won, it was the underworld invasion. When the underworld invasion, there will be no sun in the day and no stars in the night. The world will become extremely cold. The creatures on the earth can only rely on geothermal heat to keep warm. At that time, volcanoes, hot springs, and the heat flow in the South Sea will become the most precious resources. Countless wars will take place there. The war will not last for too long. Most people will die because of hunger, cold, and desperate killing. You must know that it will be an unimaginably cold and realistic world. And after a few decades, the whole earth will become extremely quiet, as if it will never wake up from a deep sleep. Only the strongest and most determined people, whether humans or beasts, can survive. These cold and dark ages are called the Dharma ending age by the Buddhism sect, and the Taoism sect calls them Yama's advent. The headmaster of the academy said, and I am used to calling it, the everlasting night. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 499. Ning Ke looked at the steep cliff under his feet and the beautiful waterfall under the starlight. He imagined the countless nights without starlight and could not help but feel a little cold. He looked at the headmaster and said, if the underworld invasion happened many times in history, the alternation between the everlasting night and the everlasting day had happened many times. However, the human race did not go extinct. It could only mean that, like what you said earlier, some of the strongest and most determined people survived the long night. I just don't understand. Those who could survive the long night must have gone through a natural selection. The remaining people must be the most powerful cultivators. But why don't these people exist in the West Hill scriptures or the stories of the Buddhism sect? The headmaster said, you should have seen the stone statues of the venerables in the Wanyan Tower Temple. The venerables of the Buddhism sect are equivalent to the sages recorded in the Hautian Taoism scriptures. In the legends, these humans have almost infinite lifespans and extremely determined wills. That is why they have successfully survived the everlasting night and waited for the day when Hautian won again. Ning Ke only learned about these powerful beings that had long been forgotten by the world tonight. He was extremely shocked and said, these cultivators must be the most powerful humans. But why didn't they survive? The headmaster said, almost infinite is not infinite. They can defeat the night, but they can't defeat the eternal time. Besides, in my opinion, these cultivators are far from being the most powerful. Ning Ke felt that there was something wrong with the headmaster's words. In such a cruel and realistic everlasting night, the ones who could survive should be the most powerful. At this moment, the headmaster suddenly looked at him and asked, do you think cultivation is a gift from Hautian to humans? This question was very sudden and seemed to have nothing to do with the conversation between the headmaster and the disciple. So Ning Ke did not react for a moment. When he understood the question, he suddenly thought of how he inherited the youngest uncle's mantle and joined the devil's way at the front gate of the devil's doctrine. He shook his head and said, at least not all cultivators. The headmaster looked into Ning Ke's eyes and said slowly, a real cultivator cultivates his own heart and will eventually cultivate to the absolute self. That is absolute pride. They can hide around volcanoes like the venerables of the Buddhism sect and the sages of Hautian Taoism. They can survive on a small amount of moss and only need water. But how can they accept becoming a shivering mouse in the night? The more powerful the cultivator, the more unwilling they are. So when the everlasting night comes, they do not choose to hide. They choose to fight with Yama and die. Ning Ke knew that the headmaster was right. How could someone like youngest uncle kneel before Yama's throne or hide in a mouse hole? If the night really came in the future, second brother would definitely be the first to jump out and fight with Yama. Then, as the headmaster said, he would die. Thinking of that scene, thinking of the dark night in his dream, thinking that he might be the son of Yama, he felt that the night wind between the cliffs became colder and colder, and he suddenly had the urge to jump down. But he still had the headmaster, a pot of old wine and some beef beside him. His life was still bright and beautiful, but Sang Sang was still sick. How could he bear to do that? He looked at the flowing clouds between the cliffs and asked blankly, the hot sea is freezing, and the night in the far north is getting longer. These all indicate that the underworld is about to invade. Teacher, what should we do? The headmaster held the small yellow clay pot and sighed, I have been searching for decades in the world, but I still can't find the underworld. How can I know what to do? After all, cultivators compete with time. It's a pity that it's too late for me to see the scene of the last everlasting night. After saying this, he drank a mouthful of wine. His white eyebrows fluttered slightly, and a rare trace of worry appeared in his usually carefree expression. The West Hill Divine Palace is a follower of Haotian. They should know the most about the war between light and darkness. Didn't they make any preparations? Ning Ke asked. Everyone can see the darkness at the end of the road, not to mention the followers of Haotian. The headmaster said, although I don't know what happened during the last underworld invasion, I think the followers of Haotian Taoism will fight with Yama with all their might for the glory of Haotian. If they can't defeat Yama, they will hide and save their lives. They will come again when Haotian defeats Yama. Ning Ke said, it sounds a little weak. The headmaster said, they have always been weak people. Ning Ke suddenly remembered what Lianqing 32 said when he was talking about the West Hill Divine Palace and the Jishou Abbey among the white bones at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. He said, the Divine Hall is a group of dogs raised by the Jishou Abbey. So what if it's a shabby abbey? They are still dogs raised by Haotian. They are all dogs. The headmaster said, the Devil's Doctrine appeared 1,000 years ago. The great divine priest of light who founded the Devil's Doctrine never experienced the everlasting night, so there is no way to deal with it in the doctrine of the Devil's Doctrine. Ning Ke said, I heard that the Devil's Doctrine also worships Yama. The headmaster said, it's not faith, it's fear. The people in the Devil's Doctrine need an idol to resist the majesty of Haotian. It's just psychological comfort. Ning Ke thought of what Lotus had said before she died. After a moment of hesitation, he repeated it to the headmaster. Some people say that the Devil's Doctrine is a moss-covered stone that hides in the dark to avoid Haotian's divine light. They say that they don't respect Haotian, but they are actually very afraid of Haotian. That's why Haotian allows the existence of the Devil's Doctrine. In fact, there was another part of the sentence, but he cut it off. At that time, Lotus said that if Ning Ke picked up the sword left by youngest uncle, he would lose all respect and even fear of Haotian. That was the real Devil's Doctrine, and Haotian would never allow such a person to exist. The headmaster's white eyebrows fluttered and he asked, who said that? Ning Ke answered, Lianqing 32. The headmaster said, although Lotus is perverse and has some mental problems, he is still somewhat knowledgeable. Although it was dangerous for you to meet him, it was also a lucky chance. Although he had some mental problems, he was still somewhat knowledgeable. Ning Ke did not know what to say. He thought that only the headmaster or youngest uncle were qualified to comment so casually on such a talented person like Lotus. The headmaster asked, what did Lotus say about the Buddhism sect? Ning Ke said, he said that the Buddhism sect is only deliberately mystifying and is no different from a fortune teller. He also hated the Buddhism sect's emphasis on self-cultivation. When faced with the transfer of fate, they could only wait humbly and could never reach the real nirvana realm. Does the transfer of fate refer to the underworld invasion? It should be. It sounds like Lotus is not only reasonable but also knowledgeable. However, different schools and sects have their own origins. It is not appropriate for me to make such an overbearing comment. The headmaster said, according to the Buddhist scriptures, a long time ago, when the Ueluan kingdom was not called Ueluan kingdom, the earliest Buddha knew about life and death. He was sad and confused and did not know how to extricate himself. He also foresaw the underworld invasion and the coming of the night. He was in unspeakable pain and did not know how to extricate himself. He traveled around and practiced self-cultivation. He sat under an osmanthus tree for 100 days and thought about how to extricate himself. He tried to make all living beings escape from death and forget the changes of day and night. Finally, the Buddha figured out a way. Ning Ke asked curiously, what way? The headmaster looked at him and said with a smile, that way is to shut up. Ning Ke thought that he had misheard and repeated subconsciously, shut up. The headmaster said, that's right. The Buddha's way is to teach all living beings to be silent and patient. They should treat everything around them as an illusion, such as wealth, pain, family, and separation. In this way, if they do not find joy in life, they will not feel pain in death. If they do not find joy in light, they will not feel pain in darkness. That's why I call this method shut up. Ning Ke asked confusedly, what's the similarity? The headmaster said, if one does not cry out in pain after being beaten, does it mean that one needs to shut up? Ning Ke was amused and praised, teacher, you are indeed good at summarizing. Suddenly, he thought of Daosher monk who had died under his blade and Qin Yan, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect who came to Cheng and on a snowy night. He frowned and said, if the Buddhism sect is really particular about being patient, why are the monks of the White Tower Temple of the Yueluan Kingdom so evil, and why are there people from the Xiankong Temple who set foot in the mortal world? This is the result of the reverse Dharma. Back then, the Buddha figured out a method to shut up and passed it down. The disciples of the Buddhism sect really believed it. In this way, the more stable one's Buddhist heart is, the more determined one will be. So what if the underworld invasion is happening? So what if it is a long night? If they are not even afraid of death, why would they be afraid of darkness? On the other hand, if they are not even afraid of darkness, why would they be afraid of death? The headmaster smiled and said, the Buddhism sect is particular about avoiding the mortal world, but this does not mean that they cannot enter the mortal world. Once they enter the mortal world, they will be even more troublesome than the fanatics of the West Hill Divine Palace. Ning Ke thought of what the headmaster had mentioned and asked curiously, if the Buddha could predict the underworld invasion countless years later, did he not predict the ending? The headmaster said, if the prophecy is useful, why are we still alive? This sentence was very meaningful. However, Ning Ke's mind was filled with the big secrets related to the underworld invasion. How could he let the headmaster of the academy get over it with this profound sentence? He said, teacher, this is not the attitude to tell a story. The headmaster was slightly annoyed and said, if you don't like my story, I will learn Buddhism. Ning Ke was confused and asked, what do you mean? The headmaster said, shut up. Ning Ke said helplessly, don't. The headmaster said, beg me. Ning Ke said without hesitation, teacher, I beg you. I just want to know what the Buddha's prophecy is. The headmaster of the academy suddenly realized that he finally had someone who was as shameless as him. He felt helpless and comforted at the same time. He stroked his beard and said, when the Buddha traveled around, he once went to the Jishou Abbey and was invited by the Abbey Dean to read the 7 tomes of Arcane. He felt the oracle of Haotian and wrote down what he had foreseen on the Ming hand scroll. Later, the great divine priest of light took the Ming hand scroll to the wilderness to establish the devil's doctrine. It had a lot to do with those words. The reason why the Yueluan Kingdom was called Yueluan Kingdom was also because of the prophecy in the Ming hand scroll. Ning Ke said in surprise, there's a message from Buddha on the Ming hand scroll? The headmaster said, among the 7 scrolls of the tomes of Arcane, the most important is the Tian hand scroll. The most interesting one is the Ming hand scroll. As for the other scrolls, let's not read them. Ning Ke suddenly thought of a possibility and asked, teacher, have you read the 7 volumes of the tomes of Arcane? The headmaster answered matter-of-factly, of course. Let me tell you something serious. Recently, there have been cases of accounts being stolen. I have been reporting this to the website. Everyone, please pay more attention to your account security. In Qidian Security Center, you can use your mobile phone to authenticate, and you can set up consumer protection. There is also a very useful voucher conversion. I have been working on it. I want to make sure that you can only read books in Qidian when you top up your account. That way, at least you can't steal the game. Then, tomorrow is Saturday, because I have to make up for the previous day's leave, so there will be updates. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 500. Ning Ke's question was not about the tomes of Arcane. The Ming hand scroll had always been in the academy and the headmaster could read it any time he wanted, but about the 7 volumes. When Lotus was invited to the Jishou Abbey, he had only read 2 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane. It was hard for him to imagine that there was someone in the world who had read the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane. So when he heard the headmaster's answer, he was shocked speechless. He thought that even if the headmaster was the greatest person in the world, the relationship between Haotian Taoism and the academy was so bad. How could the Taoists in the Jishou Abbey lend him the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane? The headmaster knew what he was thinking and said, "I like reading. I really wanted to read the contents of the Tomes of Arcane. I can't just stop reading because the Taoists refuse to let me." Ning Ke understood the hidden meaning in the headmaster's words. He gasped and said, "Did you break into the Jishou Abbey and force yourself to read the 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane? What's the difference between that and a bandit?" The headmaster was a little embarrassed and said, "Books are the inheritance of knowledge. They should not be hidden deep in the mountains and not be read by others. How can reading be powerful?" The 7 volumes of the Tomes of Arcane, which were supreme in the eyes of the world, were no different from ordinary books in the academy, especially in the eyes of his headmaster. Since he wanted to read them, he had to read them. Thinking of this, Ning Ke was shocked and proud. Being a Tang was something to be proud of. Being a disciple of the academy was even more so. Youngest uncle's reputation in the world, senior brother's occasional appearances in the mortal world, and especially the anecdotes about the headmaster that were unknown to the world had formed a very special atmosphere. No matter how shy and reserved one was, one would eventually become proud after staying in the atmosphere of the academy for a long time. Moreover, Ning Ke had never been a shy and reserved person. He clicked his tongue in wonder and then remembered the question he wanted to ask. What was the message of the Buddha on the Ming hand scroll? The headmaster said, "As I said, you will understand when you can understand the book." Ning Ke then remembered that he had read the Ming hand scroll. Thinking of the unclear words on the Tomes of Arcane, such as the rotation of the sun and moon, he vaguely guessed that it was the message of the Buddha. He was even more curious about the prophecy. But how could he understand it at his current state? Whether it was the back of the mountain or the front yard of the academy, the learning atmosphere had always been free and casual. As the saying goes, one should not be ashamed to ask his subordinates. Ning Ke was even more ashamed to ask his superiors. He said directly, "Teacher, I really don't understand." Ning Ke was even more ashamed to ask the headmaster. The headmaster sighed and said, "Teacher, I really don't understand." Ning Ke looked at his teacher's fluttering white eyebrows and was at a loss. He thought to himself, how could there be a language in this world that you don't understand? You're not an ordinary person. When the day enters, the night comes and the moon appears. The headmaster looked at the sky full of stars above the precipice and said, "The first sentence refers to the Dharma ending age mentioned by the Buddhism sect. The arrival of night means the underworld invasion. But what is moon? The Yueluan kingdom got its name from this. The moon must be a rotating object. You said a few words last year tonight, but who has seen it?" He turned to look at Ning Ke and said, "The reason why I don't understand is because it is a prophecy. As I said before, if prophecies are useful, why are we still alive? Since we will live according to our own will, the prophecy may not come true. Since it may not come true, it may never appear in our world. Since it will never appear, how can we understand it?" This sentence was a little hard to pronounce, but Ning Ke heard it clearly. He roughly understood his teacher's attitude towards the Ming hand scroll. After thinking for a moment, he asked, "Since the prophecy of the Buddhism sect is not important, why should I go to the Lank Temple?" The headmaster asked, "What is the Lank Temple most famous for?" "He should be a monk." Ning Ke thought about it in his heart, but he knew that he would be scolded by his teacher if he were to say such an answer. Suddenly, he recalled the rumors about Prince Long Qing before he entered Chang'an, and thought about the important junctures in Master Lotus' life. He asked in disbelief, "Is it the debate?" He had answered seriously and cautiously, but he did not expect that his answer would still make the headmaster extremely dissatisfied. The headmaster said angrily, "You talk and I'll talk. That's just a group of cultivators talking about love. They're just a bunch of cultivators messing around and fooling around with those mysterious scholars and Taoist priests. It's all Lotus and the little monk from the Lank Temple's fault for starting such a bad trend. Ning Ke asked, "What is the Lank Temple most famous for?" The headmaster said, "What is written on the invitation card?" The Lank Temple is most famous for the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival. Ning Ke said unhappily, "Even if the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is famous, what does it have to do with me?" The headmaster said, "The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is the Ghost Festival. It started countless years ago and originated from the legend of the underworld invasion. The most important part of it is to worship the ghosts. In the beginning, it was a ceremony for the human world to beg the underworld to come later. In other words, it was to send a message to the underworld, telling them to live a good life there and not to think about the human world." Ning Ke was shocked when he realized that the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was related to the legend of the underworld. The headmaster continued, "The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was originally a festival of Haotian Taoism. I don't know why, maybe the believers of Haotian Taoism felt that it was embarrassing for them to do such a thing, so it gradually evolved into a Taoist field with incense and Buddha's voice. However, as time passed, most people forgot the origin of this festival." Ning Ke said, "If the underworld really wants to invade, how can they be sent away with just a few nice words? Besides, I think if the underworld really exists, the people there won't like to eat incense and candles." The headmaster slapped his thigh heavily and said, "Yes. Why do we need to cultivate if nice words work? That is why I have been thinking that the Taoist and Buddhist sects created this Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival to use the light of Buddha to suppress the underworld. People would only slap their thighs when they were talking excitedly." The headmaster was also excited at this time. However, he thought that the action of slapping his thigh looked a little indecent and did not match his image of a high mountain. Therefore, he did not slap his own thigh, but slapped Ning Ke's thigh heavily. Feeling the burning pain from his thigh, Ning Ke's expression suddenly changed. He opened his mouth, but before he could cry out in pain, he heard the second half of his teacher's words and suddenly forgot the pain. "Suppress the underworld. Is the entrance to the underworld in the Lank Temple?" The headmaster did not notice his expression at all and said, "Countless Buddhist temples in the world have the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival, not just the Lank Temple. Moreover, I have been there many years ago and did not find any entrance to the underworld. You can go and look for it again this time. Maybe it will answer some of your questions." The headmaster spoke calmly and casually, but Ning Ke was shocked. Thinking of the words, "suppress the underworld," made him feel uncomfortable all over. His skin itched terribly, as if some black smoke was about to seep out of his pores. The Buddhism sect was now suspecting that he was the son of Yama. If he went to the Lank Temple to participate in the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival, wouldn't he be suppressed by the light of Buddha? Would he be suppressed under the mountain for 500 years? There was a light mountain breeze between the cliffs, and the wisteria fruits hanging in the rain corridor swayed with the wind. They were shaped like copper bells, but there was no clear sound. Only a few light popping sounds could be heard as the ripe fruits fell to the ground and burst into juice. The unique fragrance of the wisteria, which was a mixture of fat and fresh, immediately filled the air. Ning Ke thought for a long time and plucked up his courage to ask, "Teacher, what is the son of Yama?" The headmaster looked at the night clouds in front of the master and disciple and said, "According to the records of the Xiankong Temple's Book of Light and the Miming hand scroll, Yama has 70,000 children. Every time the day and night alternates and before the underworld invasion, a son of Yama will come to the human world to foretell and guide the coming of the night." "Guide?" Ning Ke repeated in surprise. The headmaster said, "Of course, the coming of the night needs guidance, just like the light needs guidance. Of course, all these years, I have been thinking whether it is guidance or projection." Ning Ke lowered his head again and kept silent for a long time. It was not until the night grew darker and the starlight became dimmer and the night clouds between the cliffs became as black as ink that he said, "Teacher, if I am really the son of Yama, will you kill me?" The headmaster looked at him and smiled. He said matter-of-factly again, "Of course." Ning Ke raised his head and looked at him. His eyes were full of innocence and begging, like a kitten that had just opened its eyes and was extremely pitiful because of hunger and fear of the strange world. Everyone's life is unique. Even if all the lives in the world are added up, they are only as unique as my life. Teacher, you can't take it too hard. The headmaster looked at him and said seriously, to exchange one's life for the safety of billions of people in the world, this is what a hero and a saint should do. If that day really comes, I hope you can kill yourself. Ning Ke naturally disagreed and said indignantly, I have said that eldest brother is a benevolent person and second brother is a man of ideals. I am just a selfish person. I don't even want to be a man of ideals, let alone a saint. Teacher, you have gone too far by using such words to provoke me. The headmaster suddenly laughed out loud. Hearing the laughter, Ning Ke was a little helpless. The headmaster looked at him and said with admiration, Not bad, not bad. Since you are a human, you should be a human. Why do you have to be a saint? You have thought it through. In my opinion, since you can think it right, I believe you will not do anything wrong in the future. I am very pleased, haha. In the night, the hearty and even arrogant laughter echoed between the cliffs and gradually disappeared. Ning Ke was still extremely helpless and did not know what to say. The headmaster looked at him and said with a smile, The son of Yama needs to be defined, but it cannot be defined by humans. Only you can define it. Just like how humans are humans because we believe that we are humans. Only we can define humans, not Haotian or other beings. Ning Ke smiled bitterly and said, Teacher, what you said makes sense. I am not flattering you. I really think it makes sense. But only you are qualified to say this. The headmaster said, I did not say this. It was your youngest uncle who said it. Go for the massage. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 501. So it was Little Ant Master's words. Ning Ke looked at the faintest light in Cheng and city in the distance. After a long silence, he asked, Teacher, do we really have to go to the Lang Temple? The headmaster said, It's up to you. But if you don't go, no one will be able to answer your doubts, not even me. And I always feel that this trip to the Lang Temple is your lucky chance. Ning Ke asked, What kind of lucky chance? I'm not a person who believes in destiny. The headmaster said, However, after seeing many things over the years, I gradually feel that my views are too stubborn. I have some new understandings. Fortuitous encounters are not something that is destined to happen by the heavenly Tao. Instead, some people living in this world, because of the ideals in their hearts, even a single thought will begin to affect the environment and people around them. In the end, it will affect the other party who is extremely far away. Until you meet them, the thoughts in your mind will turn into actual stories. Then, you will go back to the beginning of the story, and you will often find that what you want in the end is what you want. This is probably fate. The headmaster continued, Sang Sang might be able to recover on her own, but it would be better if she could take a look at the little monk in the Lang Temple. You have inherited your youngest uncle's legacy, so you still need to learn some Buddhist Dharma to dilute the hostility. You have to figure out if you are the son of Yama, and you should go and see what the Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival is all about. It is your lucky chance that you need to do all this. Ning Ke said absent-mindedly, It sounds like what the monks say, but I don't understand. The headmaster said, You'll understand if you listen more to the monks. Will it be dangerous? You'll get hit by a carriage while walking. Teacher, I'll take your words as a tacit agreement. Since when did I recognize him? Ning Ke withdrew his gaze from Cheng and looked down at his knees. He said, If even you think it's dangerous, what about me and Sang Sang? The headmaster smiled and said, without simmering it for 3 days and 3 nights, how can the Buddha jumps over the wall be achieved? If you don't. Ning Ke raised his hands and begged for mercy. He said painfully, I've heard what youngest uncle said so many times. Teacher, you don't have to say it again. The headmaster said, let's go and take a look. We won't know until we see. Ning Ke sighed and said, the world is so wonderful. The headmaster said in surprise, I didn't expect you to receive it so well. What's good about it? There's a rhyme. I just feel bored. It was still windy tonight, and the cliffs were very gentle. However, Ning Ke was not in a relaxed mood. He asked with a gloomy expression, Teacher, you are a man of great ability. Can't you see the future? The headmaster said, the end of cultivation is time. Even though I have lived longer than ordinary people, I am not old enough to experience the last underworld invasion. I did not see what happened before the everlasting night. It is probably because of this that I cannot fully understand the Ming hand scroll. I do not know how this story will develop. Now that you are a character in this story, I do not know what changes will happen to you in the future. But I hope it will be good. Ning Ke asked, are there still people in this world who experienced the last underworld invasion? In the past, he did not believe that cultivators could live for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. However, as he entered the back of the mountain of the academy and became more knowledgeable, he began to wonder if there was such a thing as immortality in the world. The headmaster said, I know 2 people who experienced the last everlasting night. Ning Ke did not expect that there would be such people. He asked in surprise, what kind of people? The headmaster seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became a little complicated. He said indifferently, a drunkard and a butcher. But they do not care about the affairs of the world. I am afraid they are not people. Ning Ke once again thought of the strange dreams he had. In one of his dreams, a drunkard and a butcher appeared. They stood beside him and stared at him. In another dream, the headmaster snatched the wine bag from the drunkard's hand and drank a mouthful. Then, he snatched a pig's hind leg from the butcher's back and took a bite. Could the headmaster be talking about those 2 people? Ning Ke was shocked and said, Teacher, do you really not want to hear my dream? The headmaster looked at him and said with a smile, do you still not understand? That is your own dream after all. At this point, Ning Ke finally understood what the headmaster meant. Any story needed to be advanced in order to know the future development. Any scene had to be seen with one's own eyes in order to know what color it was. Whether one was the son of Yama or what would happen in the future, one had to walk in the story and then choose. In other words, one was the author. The headmaster floated away. Only Ning Ke was left on the dark cliff. Looking at the night sky and the flowing clouds, he thought of what Master Lotus said to him before he died and frowned. You have joined the devil. If you want to cultivate the devil, you must first cultivate the Buddha. Then please walk bravely into the night. Although you have no chance of success and may die as soon as you start on the road, I still wish you well and curse you. He silently repeated these words, then stood up and waved his hand at the darkness that occupied his entire field of vision, saying, if you really are the Netherworld King, if I really am your son, then please remember that when teacher can't protect me, you must protect me a little. In the West Hill, on the lush spring peach mountain, the black divine hall of judgment exuded a cold and murderous aura. The hall was extremely spacious. Hundreds of priests in red robes and deacons in black kneeled on the smooth and flat ground, looking like a red flower in the dark night on the ground. The priests and deacons had been kneeling for a long time and their knees were already aching. But no one dared to get up or even look up. They looked down at their own reflections on the smooth floor of the divine hall and saw the humble expressions on their faces. Even they could not understand why they were so humble. A deep fear from the bottom of their hearts made their bodies stiff. As a result, the red flower in the dark night on the ground became a little rustling. Instead of feeling beautiful, it could only make people feel cold and bloody. For countless years, the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace had been like this. People in the judicial department dealt with horrible punishments all day long and believed in the principle that the strong would always be strong. So no one was unfamiliar with this atmosphere. The Divine Hall of Judgment did not change much. It was still empty and cold. The blood-like seat of heavenly black jade was still there. But the bead curtain in front of the seat of heavenly black jade had been broken into bead powder in the battle a few days ago and could no longer be repaired. In the end, it was swept into the garbage by the handyman and disappeared. The bead curtain had been in the Divine Hall of Judgment for many years and added a lot of mysterious and horrible aura to the powerful man on the seat of heavenly black jade. People were used to the existence of the bead curtain. Now they had to get used to the bead curtain because the powerful man on the seat of heavenly black jade was dead. Now sitting on the seat of heavenly black jade was a young and beautiful girl. Of course, in the eyes of the subordinates of the judicial department, the girl's body now had some kind of divinity. Because they could not look at her directly, they did not have the concept of beauty in the secular world. She represented power and horror. After a long time, Yi Hongyu sat on the seat of heavenly black jade with her hands supporting her chin. She remained silent and expressionless. She was extremely calm, which made her look extremely cold. When she did not speak, the entire Divine Hall of Judgment did not dare to make any sound. All the divine priests and deacons knelt on the ground and did not dare to look up. They did not even dare to guess what was going on. Some timid people clenched their teeth in fear and found that the sound was so clear that they almost fainted. Yi Hongyu looked at the people who knelt respectfully in front of the seat of heavenly black jade and listened to their nervous and frightened breathing. She recalled what she had seen and experienced over the years. There was a faint sense of mockery and disgust in her beautiful eyes. She even felt a little tired. A divine priest walked in from the side of the divine hall and bowed respectfully in front of the seat of heavenly black jade. Yi Hongyu waved her hand in annoyance. The divine priest opened the thick dossier and looked at the people who knelt in fear in front of the seat of heavenly black jade. He said expressionlessly, "The merciful and majestic Haotian has guided people out of the dark wilderness. The apostles with sharp swords have broken the ice in the ancient river and stand in front of the bonfire to announce to the people, like the change of dynasties in the secular world, the inheritance of the great divine priest of judgment would always set off a storm of blood." As the indifferent voice of the divine priest sounded, 14 red-robed divine priests and deacons in black were dragged out of the divine hall of judgment. There were sounds of axes chopping and cries from time to time outside the hall. These 14 divine priests and deacons were the staunch supporters of the former great divine priest of judgment. Some of them had to die. They might have to live to continue to contribute to the West Hill Divine Palace. The dead should be rejoiced because the living would spend the rest of their lives regretting their foolishness when the Tao addict lost her power. The divine priest's voice echoed in the empty divine hall of judgment. As the names were called out one by one, the subordinates of the judicial department who knelt on the ground became more and more frightened. No one knew if their name would be called. Only the commanders of cavalrymen of Divine Hall in black and gold armor who knelt in the middle seemed relatively calm. The commanders of cavalrymen of Divine Hall were directly under the jurisdiction of the judicial department. But after the death of Prince Long Qing 2 years ago, the power of personnel and punishment of cavalrymen of Divine Hall was transferred from the hierarch lord to the commander of the Divine Guards, Luo Kadi. And these commanders believed that although they were not respectful to the current great divine priest of judgment, they were not those powerless divine priests who only knew how to read scriptures. They were powerhouses in the see-through state. The judicial department was very realistic. As long as one had enough power, he could redeem the corresponding sins and be qualified to continue living. After all, the West Hill Divine Palace ruled the world by executors like them. However, what no one in the temple expected was that the priest's gaze finally landed on the gorgeous black and gold armor of these cavalry commanders. He then slowly read out their names. Zmo Yuanjun, Lu Shao. Hearing their names, the commanders of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall could not suppress their fear and bewilderment. They raised their heads and looked at the seat of heavenly black jade one after another. However, they found that the girl sitting on the seat of heavenly black jade was supporting her chin with her hands and eyes closed, as if she had fallen asleep. The cavalry commander named ZMO was the most qualified and the most powerful among them. He looked at his colleagues who were frightened but did not know what to do. He shook his head and slowly stood up, patted his knees, looked at the girl on the throne and asked slowly, "Why? If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 502. Other than the broken bead curtain that day, the Divine Hall of Judgment had been free of dust for many years. Of course, that did not include the fine sand in the depths of the stone cracks, which could only be forced out by the horrible aura of the seat of heavenly black jade. But at least kneeling on the ground for a while would not touch any dirt. That was why Commander ZMO stood up and patted his knees. He did not really want to get rid of any dust. He just wanted to express his contempt for the girl on the seat of heavenly black jade to regain his confidence, so that he would not be crushed by the majesty of the seat of heavenly black jade again. There were 10 teams of cavalrymen from the Divine Hall of West Hill. Each team had a commander. Commander ZMO had long entered the upper state of see-through and was as famous as Chinbachi. Of course, he knew that he was no match for Yi Hongyu. But he had to stand up because he did not want to die. Yi Hongyu blinked and slowly opened her eyes. She looked at the man in front of the seat of heavenly black jade without any expression on her face. Before she could speak, she frowned and coughed painfully. A maidservant nervously walked to the seat of heavenly black jade and handed her a silk handkerchief that was as white as snow. Yi Hongyu took the handkerchief and gently wiped her lips. 2 red plum blossoms appeared on the white handkerchief. Everyone in the Divine Hall of West Hill knew that Yi Hongyu was seriously injured, including these powerful commanders. But even though the judicial department had always followed the law of the jungle, no one dared to take advantage of her injury because no one had the confidence. When Yi Hongyu broke the bead curtain and killed the former Great Divine Priest of Judgment, everyone in the Divine Hall thought that she would take over the position of Great Divine Priest of Judgment. But to everyone's surprise, after closing her eyes and resting for a moment, she walked down from the seat of heavenly black jade and walked towards the white divine temple at the highest point of Peach Mountain. Under the astonished gazes of countless people, she severely injured Luokadi, the commander of the divine guards, with 1 strike. If not for the hierarch's order, she would have killed that person. Few people in the world could kill the great divine priest of judgment and then the commander of the divine guards. Even if they could do it, they probably wouldn't dare to do it. Logically speaking, even if Yi Hongyu broke through to the knowing destiny state, she wouldn't be able to do it. But she dared to do it and actually succeeded. The image of the indigo robe flying on the Peach Mountain would forever remain in the memory of everyone in the Divine Hall. That battle had completely established the status of the indigo robe girl in the Divine Hall. From that day on, no one in the Divine Hall of Judgment would dare to challenge Her Majesty. ZMO did not dare to be picky, even if he saw her coughing up blood and knew that she was seriously injured at this time. After defeating the terrifying Great Divine Priest of Judgment and the powerful commander Luokadi, the girl on the throne did not die and only suffered some injuries. This definitely did not mean that she was weak, it only meant that she was indescribably powerful. Yi Hongyu held her chin and looked at him quietly. She said softly, "Kneel." At this time, the priests and deacons who were still kneeling on the ground of the Divine Hall couldn't help but look at each other when they heard these 2 words. They naturally remembered the scene when the great divine priest walked into the Divine Hall that day, and recalled that they had once enthusiastically shouted for him to kneel down, and their expressions suddenly became extremely strange. The divine priests and deacons understood the fear and thoughts in each other's eyes. They raised their heads and pointed to the only standing commander ZMO. They shouted angrily, "Kneel! Kneel! Kneel!" Hundreds of people shouted in unison, their voices rumbling like thunder, echoing in the empty divine hall of judgment. Their expressions were so angry that their spittle flew everywhere. Their voices were a little hoarse, and their facial features were distorted. They looked like a group of fanatical lunatics. Yi Hongyu looked at them calmly. She was a little satisfied and a little tired. Zimo's face became paler and paler, and his body became stiffer and stiffer. He couldn't even maintain his balance and swayed like a weak patient. Hearing the thunderous scolding coming from beside him, Zmo looked at his colleagues who were usually gentle and even flattering but now had become so cold and angry. Why? He asked the question again, but he was not as calm as before. He even deliberately had a trace of disrespect, and his eyes were full of a pitiful look. The divine priest closed the thick file and looked at Zmo and the cavalry commanders who were kneeling on the ground and begging for mercy. He scolded them coldly, "How dare you? You are the generals of the divine hall, but you have fallen so low. The great divine priest thought that you have made some small contributions to the judicial department and showed mercy. He did not take your bodies, but only stripped you of your duties and cultivation and demoted you to commoners. You are not grateful for God's grace, but how dare you talk here? If they were not stripped of their bodies, they would not be beheaded." However, as the cavalry commanders of the West Hill Divine Hall, Zmo and the others had helped the judicial department hunt down the remnants of the devil's doctrine and search for heresy. They had done many things and many people wanted them dead. If they were really stripped of their cultivation and chased out of Peach Mountain, they would lose the protection of the West Hill Divine Hall. What kind of miserable ending would they face? Hearing this, Zmo's body shook even more and he almost fell to the ground. He looked at the girl on the throne and shouted in horror, "Only Commander Luo has the authority to punish us. Great divine priest, you have overstepped your authority. Aren't you worried that the hierarch lord will be angry?" Yi Hongyu slowly sat up and looked at him expressionlessly. She said, "Commander Luo Kadi is now sick in bed, so the hierarch lord has returned your authority to me." Luo Kadi, the commander of the West Hill Divine Hall Divine Guards, was a grand cultivator who had entered the Knowing Destiny state many years ago. How could such a person be sick? Everyone knew that the real reason Commander Luo Kadi was sick in bed was not because of illness, but because he was seriously injured by Yi Hongyu. Thinking of this, the people of the judicial department felt a chill in their hearts. The thunderous scolding in the divine hall gradually disappeared. Zmo's face became paler and paler. He stood there in a daze and said in a hoarse voice, "Great divine priest, please tell us what sins we have committed." The divine priest looked serious and was about to scold him again. At this moment, Yi Hongyu raised her hand. The divine priest immediately shut up and humbly retreated to the side of the seat of heavenly black jade. Yi Hongyu quietly looked at Zmo and the cavalry commanders for a long time. There was dead silence in the divine hall of judgment. Yi Hongyu suddenly smiled and said calmly, "You know very well that all sins are fake. The reason why I want to expel you from the divine hall is very simple. It is because you once looked at me in that way, so I don't want to see you again." Zmo suddenly understood. Last spring, Yi Hongyu was weak because she had fallen into a lower realm. The whole divine hall was rumored that Commander Luo Kadi had obtained the approval of the hierarch lord and was ready to propose marriage to her. Under such circumstances, the cavalry commanders led by Chinbachi gradually looked at her differently. Some of them showed greed like Chinbachi, some showed pity as if they were admiring a weak beauty, and some looked at her as if she were their sister-in-law. There was no hostility in these gazes, and not all of them were malicious. However, when those gazes fell on the great divine priest of judgment, then they all deserved to die. Zmo was desperate. He looked down at the smooth floor of the divine hall and said with a faint smile, "We have made so many contributions to the divine hall. Do we have to die just because we looked at her a few more times? We deserve to die just because we looked at her a few more times." Yi Hongyu said with a smile, "If you had not made some contributions to the judicial department, do you think I would let you leave Peach Mountain alive?" Zmo looked at her on the seat of heavenly black jade and said in a trembling voice with the last glimmer of hope, "Great divine priest, we are still of some use. Our cultivation can still help the divine hall. No, help you do something. It is a pity that we are crippled like this. Please give us a chance to atone for our crimes." Yi Hongyu was a little tired. She rested her chin on her hand and said, "I have said that you are not guilty. How can you atone for your crimes? I just don't want to see you." The priest walked forward again and looked at the cavalry commanders. He said calmly, "You will receive your punishment later. Great divine priest has compassion on you and has specially given you an old horse to plow the fields and 100 taels of silver to settle down." Inside the divine hall of judgment, hundreds of people knelt on the ground, trembling. No one dared to obey. Zmo slowly clenched his fists, and the commanders beside him could not help but look up. Yi Hongyu did not even look at them. The priest looked at them as if he did not see their emotional changes. He continued to say expressionlessly, "In the future, if you step into the West Hill Divine Kingdom, you will die. If you dare to mention that you have served the Divine Hall, you will die. If you hold a grudge and speak nonsense, you will die." Zmo looked around. It was silent. After the commanders heard the cruel verdict, they did not dare to look him in the eye. After a long time, the struggling expression on his face turned into a strong self-mockery. He sighed sadly and slowly knelt on the ground, accepting the cruel punishment in pain and speechlessness. The side of the divine hall of judgment lit up with a holy and cold light. Zmo's painful and angry beast-like howls and the cavalry commander's painful cries rose one after another. They had worked hard for half of their lives and finally entered the see-through realm. They had become real powerhouses. But today, their cultivation was destroyed, and they became ordinary people who were even worse than ordinary people. Gradually, the black divine hall of judgment became calm and even colder and scarier. The empty divine hall was so quiet that it did not seem to belong to the human world. Yi Hongyu sat on the blood-colored seat of heavenly black jade, looking calm. The seat of heavenly black jade was very big, and it should not be comfortable to sit on it. But she was very comfortable sitting on it. The trusted priest knelt in front of the seat of heavenly black jade and advised in a low voice, "Great divine priest, Zmo and the others are indeed very powerful. And from their previous performance, you can look forward to their loyalty to you. It would be a pity to cripple them and expel them from the divine hall." And Commander Luo, Yi Hongyu slightly lowered her head on the seat of heavenly black jade. She rested her chin on her hand, as if she had fallen asleep. "Luo Kadi is just a loser. One day, I will kill him. Since that is the case, why should I care about his feelings? And no one can see that the world is changing. It will change into a world that many people are unfamiliar with. In that world, even grand cultivators in the knowing destiny state can be killed at any time. Any idea of relying on cultivators in the see-through state is so ridiculous." In the late spring of the 16th year of the Tianqi era of the Tang Empire in the 3447th year of the Great Rule of West Hill, 7 commanders of the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall were destroyed by the new Great Divine Priest of Judgment, Yi Hongyu, and were expelled from the Divine Hall. They were forbidden to step into the West Hill Divine Kingdom again. These once glorious commanders led an old and skinny horse, with 100 taels of silver in their pockets, and walked down the Peach Mountain with their squires like stray dogs. In the records of the West Hill Divine Palace, the crimes of these 7 cavalrymen were very vague. There was only one word, depravity. Therefore, they had a shameful nickname, Fallen Knights. And people in the West Hill Divine Palace knew very well that the reason why these cavalrymen were so severely punished was because they took an extra glance at the girl in the crowd last spring. It's really painful to save manuscripts. Please vote for me on Monday to relieve my pain. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.